Kant's idea of moral autonomy empowers each individual with the freedom and responsibility to govern themselves through reason rather than being controlled by external forces or desires. "Hello, whispered ones. Tonight, we embark on a journey through the quiet depths of the human mind, a place where the power of reason reigns supreme and where the echoes of ancient wisdom still linger in the cool night air. Close your eyes and imagine a world where each of us is gifted with the ability to choose our own path, not dictated by fear or by the whims of others, but by the clear light of reason that glows gently within each of us. It is here, in this world of quiet reflection, that we find Immanuel Kant, a philosopher who believed deeply in the power of the individual. For Kant, we are not simply passengers in life, pulled along by the forces of fate or circumstance. No, we are the captains of our own souls, each of us equipped with the moral compass of reason to guide us. In this realm of moral autonomy, we are free to act according to universal principles, principles that respect the dignity of every human being, including our own. But this freedom comes with a responsibility to act not out of selfish desires, but with a deep understanding of what is right, what is just, and what serves the greater good. Kant's philosophy teaches us that, even when no one is watching, our actions should reflect the kind of world we would wish to create. It is a quiet, steady kind of wisdom, one that whispers to us in the stillness of night, reminding us that we each hold the power to shape the world around us with every choice we make. So, as you settle in, ready to drift through the calm waters of thought, let Kant's philosophy be your guide. Tonight, we will explore his legacy, the deep connection between reason, freedom, and morality. Relax and let your mind wander as we step quietly into the world of Immanuel Kant, where every action carries meaning and every choice echoes with the power of reason. In the quiet, winding streets of 18th century Königsberg, the young Immanuel Kant grew up in a world far removed from the grandeur and wealth often associated with great philosophers. Born in 1724 to a humble family of craftsmen, Kant's early life was shaped by the modesty of his surroundings and the strict yet nurturing upbringing provided by his parents. His father, Johann Georg Kant, was a harness maker, working hard to support his family. Kant's mother, Anna Regina, was known for her deep religious faith and moral devotion. Though their means were limited, the Kant household was rich in discipline, structure, and a sense of duty, values that would echo throughout Immanuel's life and philosophy. Kant's childhood was steeped in the teachings of Pietism, a religious movement that emphasized personal faith, humility, and living a life of moral rectitude. The Pietist influence in his home was profound. His parents, especially his mother, encouraged a deep sense of piety, modesty, and a strong work ethic. The Kant family valued moral discipline over material wealth, a mindset that left an indelible mark on young Immanuel. These early lessons in self-control, devotion, and duty became the underpinnings of his later philosophical works, particularly his ideas surrounding moral law and the categorical imperative. Yet, despite the strict discipline that governed his daily life, Kant's childhood was not without warmth and wonder. His mother, though deeply religious, was also fascinated by nature. She would often take young Immanuel on walks outside Königsberg, pointing out the beauty of the natural world, the trees, the flowing rivers, the animals. These moments filled young Kant's mind with awe and curiosity. Nature, in all its intricate complexity, stirred within him a desire to understand the world not just through faith, but through observation and reason. This early exposure to the natural world laid the groundwork for Kant's later fascination with the sciences and his belief in the power of human reason. As a boy, Kant was an excellent student, excelling in his early education at the local Pietist school. The school's curriculum was heavily influenced by religious instruction, but it also introduced Kant to the classical languages of Latin and Greek, which he mastered with ease. These languages opened the door to the great works of philosophy and science that had come before him. His intellectual curiosity began to blossom, and soon he was devouring the works of great thinkers like Aristotle and Descartes. In these early years, Kant's mind was a sponge, absorbing everything from theological debates to the mechanics of the natural world. Kant's early education was not just academic, it was also deeply moral. His schooling, rooted in pietist teachings, emphasized the importance of living a virtuous life, of serving others, and of following one's moral duty. This environment nurtured a strong sense of ethical responsibility in Kant, a concept that would later become central to his philosophical writings. He was taught that life was not just about individual desires or pleasures, but about fulfilling one's role in society with integrity and honor. These ideas would form the bedrock of Kant's later work, particularly in his ethical theory, where he argued that moral actions must stem from duty rather than personal inclination. In the evenings, young Kant would sit quietly in the family's small home, listening to his mother speak of the wonders of the universe and the mysteries of faith. These conversations, while often religious in nature, sparked in Kant a desire to explore the world through the lens of reason. He began to question, to think critically, to wonder about the nature of reality itself. Little did he know that this childhood curiosity would eventually lead him to challenge some of the most fundamental beliefs of his time. Though Kant's early life was one of modest means, it was rich in intellectual and moral grounding. The discipline instilled in him by his parents, the moral teachings of pietism, and the natural beauty of his surroundings all combined to create the foundation for his later philosophical endeavors. Kant's journey from the quiet streets of Königsberg to the heights of philosophical thought began here, in the simplicity of his early life, where curiosity and duty intertwined to shape the mind of one of history's greatest thinkers. As Kant grew from a curious child into a young man, the world around him began to influence his thoughts and shape his intellectual journey. Königsberg, the city of his birth and the heart of Prussia, was more than just his hometown. It was a vibrant hub of intellectual and cultural activity in the 18th century. Although Prussia was often seen as a land of military might and rigid discipline, its capital was alive with the currents of the Enlightenment, a movement that sought to challenge tradition and place human reason at the center of knowledge and progress. Prussia, under the reign of Frederick the Great, was undergoing a transformation. Frederick himself was an admirer of Enlightenment ideals, and he actively encouraged the spread of reason, science, and secular thought throughout his kingdom. While his policies were known for their emphasis on military strength, Frederick's reign also marked a time of intellectual flourishing. He invited philosophers, scientists, and artists to his court, fostering an environment where new ideas could take root and challenge the old ways of thinking. This balance of tradition and innovation deeply influenced the intellectual life of the nation and of Kant himself. In Königsberg, Kant found himself surrounded by the intellectual currents of the age. The city was home to a renowned university where scholars debated the great questions of the day. As a young man, Kant would have walked through its streets, passing bookstores, cafes, and lecture halls where ideas about science, politics, and morality were discussed. Königsberg, though small compared to other European capitals, was alive with the spirit of inquiry. It was a place where students and professors alike sought to understand the natural world through the lens of reason and observation, rather than through superstition or blind faith. The Enlightenment had firmly taken root in Europe by this time, and Königsberg was no exception. The writings of Isaac Newton, whose discoveries in physics had revolutionized the understanding of the natural world, were widely studied. Kant, with his growing interest in science and philosophy, was deeply influenced by Newton's work. Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation provided a framework for understanding the physical universe in a way that was both logical and empirical, ideas that would resonate with Kant's own philosophical inquiries. For Kant, Newton's ability to describe the workings of the universe through reason and observation was a powerful demonstration of the Enlightenment's ideals in action. At the same time, the Enlightenment brought new questions about human nature, morality, and governance. Thinkers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Voltaire were redefining what it meant to be a human being in a world where reason, rather than tradition, held sway. These intellectual movements would profoundly shape Kant's own thinking, particularly his later works on ethics, politics, and knowledge. The Enlightenment encouraged people to question established norms, to seek knowledge for themselves, and to trust in their own ability to reason. These ideas would form the backbone of Kant's philosophy, especially in his later call for humanity to embrace their capacity for reason with the motto, Sapere Aude. Dare to know. Yet, Königsberg was also a city steeped in tradition. While Enlightenment ideas were taking hold, the city still clung to the conservative social structures that had long defined Prussian life. The Pietist movement, which had shaped Kant's childhood, continued to play a role in the moral and spiritual life of the city. It was a time of transition, where the old ways of faith and duty coexisted uneasily with the new emphasis on individual freedom and scientific inquiry. This tension between tradition and modernity was something that Kant felt keenly, and it would inform much of his later work as he sought to reconcile these opposing forces in his philosophy. Prussia itself was a land of contrasts. On one hand, it was a highly regimented society, with a strong emphasis on duty, obedience, and order, a reflection of its powerful military presence in Europe. On the other hand, it was also a land where new ideas about freedom, equality, and reason were beginning to take root. Kant, who grew up in this environment, would become one of the most significant figures in navigating these intellectual and social tensions. His philosophy would seek to balance the competing demands of reason and duty, of individual freedom and moral law. As Kant matured, his intellectual pursuits took on greater depth. The cultural and intellectual environment of Prussia provided fertile ground for his ideas to develop. His early exposure to Enlightenment thinkers, combined with the moral rigor instilled by his Pietist upbringing, laid the foundation for the complex and nuanced philosophy that would emerge in his later years. It was here, in the bustling streets of Königsberg, that Kant began to formulate the questions that would define his life's work. What is the nature of knowledge? What is our duty as moral beings? How can we reconcile freedom with the demands of reason and law? The answers to these questions would come later, as Kant's thoughts matured and deepened. But the seeds were planted here, in the intellectual soil of Prussia, where the winds of the Enlightenment swept through the streets, carrying with them the promise of a new world of understanding. As Immanuel Kant's intellectual journey progressed, he began to grapple with questions that would form the foundation of his most influential work, the Critique of Pure Reason, Kritik der reinen Vernunft. Written in 1781, this monumental text would not only challenge the philosophical assumptions of his time, but would also shape the course of Western thought for centuries to come. The seeds of this work had been planted during Kant's youth, as he pondered the nature of knowledge and the limits of human understanding. Now, after years of contemplation, study, and teaching, Kant was ready to offer his profound insights to the world. At the heart of the Critique of Pure Reason lies one of Kant's most fundamental questions: how do we know what we know? For centuries, philosophers had debated the nature of knowledge, how it is acquired, what it consists of, and how reliable it truly is. On one side of this debate stood the empiricists, who argued that all knowledge comes from sensory experience. Thinkers like John Locke and David Hume believe that the mind is a blank slate at birth, and that all our ideas come from what we perceive through our senses. On the other side stood the rationalists, like René Descartes, who claimed that knowledge is primarily a product of reason, independent of sensory experience. Kant sought to bridge these two seemingly opposing views. He believed that both experience and reason play crucial roles in the acquisition of knowledge. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant introduced his revolutionary idea of transcendental idealism, a philosophical framework that proposed that while we perceive the world through our senses, the mind itself plays an active role in shaping that perception. According to Kant, we do not simply receive information from the outside world. Instead, our minds impose certain structures, like space, time, and causality, onto our experiences. These structures are not learned from experience, rather, they are innate to the human mind, allowing us to organize and interpret the sensory data we receive. This distinction between the phenomenal world, the world as we perceive it, and the noumenal world, the world as it exists in itself, independent of our perceptions, is one of Kant's most important contributions to philosophy. He argued that while we can know the phenomenal world, the noumenal world, the true reality behind our perceptions, remains forever beyond our grasp. This was a radical departure from the ideas of both the empiricists and the rationalists, as it acknowledged the limits of human knowledge while still affirming the power of reason and experience to shape our understanding of the world. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant also introduced a key distinction between a priori and a posteriori knowledge. A priori knowledge is knowledge that is independent of experience. It is inherent in the mind, like the understanding of mathematics or logic. For example, we know that 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 without having to rely on sensory input. This knowledge is universal and necessary. A posteriori knowledge, on the other hand, is knowledge that comes from experience, things we learn through observation, like the color of the sky or the taste of an apple. Kant argued that both types of knowledge are essential for understanding the world, and that our minds are equipped with the ability to process and categorize sensory data using these innate a priori structures. Kant's ideas about synthetic a priori judgments were particularly groundbreaking. He argued that certain statements about the world, such as those found in mathematics and physics, are both synthetic. They tell us something new about the world, and a priori, they are known independently of experience. For instance, the statement 7 plus 5 is equal to 12 is synthetic because it goes beyond simply defining the numbers. It tells us something new about the sum of 7 and 5. At the same time, it is a priori because we do not need to count physical objects to know that this statement is true. This synthesis of a priori knowledge and empirical observation formed the cornerstone of Kant's philosophy, allowing him to argue that certain forms of knowledge are both necessary and informative, even if they are not directly derived from sensory experience. The Critique of Pure Reason was not an immediate success. Upon its publication, many of Kant's contemporaries found the text difficult to understand, and its dense, technical language made it inaccessible to a broad audience. However, over time, the significance of Kant's ideas began to resonate with other philosophers and scholars. His work challenged the prevailing schools of thought and offered a new way of thinking about the relationship between mind, experience, and reality. It was a bold attempt to resolve the age-old philosophical debate between empiricism and rationalism, and its impact on the development of modern philosophy cannot be overstated. Kant's approach was revolutionary because it placed human cognition at the center of the philosophical inquiry. Rather than viewing the mind as a passive recipient of sensory data, Kant argued that the mind actively shapes and organizes the data it receives. This idea, that the mind plays an essential role in constructing reality as we experience it, was a dramatic shift from the way philosophers had traditionally understood knowledge. It opened the door to new ways of thinking about science, ethics, and metaphysics, and laid the groundwork for much of what would come in modern philosophy. In the years following the publication of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant would continue to refine and expand upon his ideas, producing further works that explored the implications of his philosophy for ethics, politics, and religion. But it was this text that laid the foundation for all that followed, a masterpiece of intellectual rigor that challenged the very limits of human knowledge and set the stage for the development of modern epistemology. After the publication of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant's ideas began to reshape the philosophical landscape. Central to his work was the question of how the human mind interacts with the world and how knowledge is constructed. For Kant, understanding the mind's role in shaping our experiences was the key to answering the fundamental questions about reality and perception. His epistemology, the theory of knowledge, introduced a revolutionary perspective, which he called transcendental idealism, challenging both rationalism and empiricism, and proposing that the mind is not a passive vessel, but an active participant in constructing our reality. At the core of Kant's epistemology is the notion that the human mind is not simply a blank slate that passively receives information from the world, as the empiricists claimed. Nor does it possess innate ideas that exist independently of experience, as the rationalists argued. Instead, Kant introduced the idea that the mind actively organizes and interprets sensory information through a priori categories, which are built into the very structure of human cognition. These categories, like space, time, and causality, are not learned through experience, but are fundamental frameworks that allow us to perceive and understand the world. Kant's famous distinction between the phenomenal world and the noumenal world illustrates this point. The phenomenal world refers to the world as we experience it, the reality that is shaped by our perceptions, filtered through the innate categories of the mind. The noumenal world, on the other hand, is the world as it exists in itself, independent of our perceptions. According to Kant, we can never truly know the noumenal world because all of our knowledge is mediated through the structures of the mind. In other words, what we perceive as reality is always filtered through our cognitive faculties, and therefore we can never access the thing in itself, das Ding in sich, that lies beyond our experience. This was a radical departure from the traditional views of knowledge. By asserting that reality as we know it is a product of the interaction between the mind and the external world, Kant revolutionized the way philosophers thought about perception and understanding. He argued that while we can know the phenomenal world, the world of appearances, we are forever limited by the cognitive structures that shape our experiences. The noumenal world, the true nature of reality, remains unknowable to us. This distinction was not only groundbreaking but also set the stage for the development of modern philosophy, influencing thinkers from Hegel to Schopenhauer and beyond. Kant's concept of transcendental idealism does not mean that reality itself is subjective or that there is no external world. Rather, Kant believed that our knowledge of the world is shaped by the structures of our minds. These structures are universal. They are shared by all humans and allow us to experience the world in a consistent and coherent way. For example, the concept of time is not something we learn through experience. Time is a category of the mind that organizes our perceptions. Without the concept of time, we would not be able to make sense of the world. Similarly, space and causality are not features of the external world but are frameworks that the mind uses to structure sensory data. These categories allow us to navigate and understand the world, but they also limit our ability to know anything beyond what these categories can process. One of Kant's most significant contributions to epistemology is his argument that synthetic a priori judgments are possible. Traditionally, philosophers believed that there were only two types of knowledge, analytic a priori knowledge, such as mathematical truths, which are true by definition and independent of experience, and synthetic a posteriori knowledge, such as empirical observations, which depend on sensory experience. Kant, however, argued that there are also synthetic a priori truths, statements that are not self-evident but can be known independently of experience. For example, the statement every event has a cause is synthetic because it adds something new to our understanding, and it is a priori because it is known independently of experience. This insight formed the foundation of Kant's epistemology and allowed him to reconcile the insights of empiricism and rationalism in a new way. In Kant's view, human cognition is an active process. The mind does not merely record sensory data like a camera, it actively shapes and interprets that data. This interpretation is governed by the a priori categories that structure our understanding. These categories, Kant argued, are necessary for any coherent experience of the world. Without them, experience would be nothing more than a chaotic blur of unconnected sensations. The fact that we can make sense of the world at all, according to Kant, is because our minds impose order on the sensory input we receive. This idea that the mind is an active participant in shaping reality marked a turning point in the history of philosophy. It laid the groundwork for later developments in phenomenology, existentialism, and constructivism, and it challenged philosophers to rethink the nature of perception, reality, and knowledge. Kant's insights would have a profound influence on later thinkers, including Johann Gottlieb Fichte, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and even modern cognitive science, which has explored how the brain constructs reality from sensory data. Kant's epistemology not only reshaped the philosophical landscape of his time, but it also provided a framework for understanding scientific inquiry. By recognizing the limits of human knowledge and the role that the mind plays in shaping our understanding of the world, Kant offered a way to reconcile the advances of Newtonian physics with the need for a deeper philosophical exploration of the nature of reality. His ideas continue to resonate today, reminding us that while we may never fully grasp the true nature of the noumenal world, our capacity for reason and inquiry allows us to navigate and understand the phenomenal world in all its complexity. As Immanuel Kant's philosophical journey progressed, he turned his attention to one of the most profound and enduring questions of human existence: what does it mean to live a moral life? Building on the insights from his earlier works, Kant sought to develop a system of ethics that was both universal and grounded in reason. His exploration of practical reason, the capacity of human beings to act according to principles rather than mere inclinations, became the foundation of his moral philosophy. In contrast to theoretical reason, which deals with what we can know, practical reason concerns itself with how we should act. Kant's moral philosophy begins with the concept of duty. Unlike other ethical theories that emphasize consequences or personal happiness, Kant's approach focuses on the intentions behind actions. According to Kant, true morality arises not from the pursuit of personal gain or the avoidance of pain, but from acting out of a sense of duty, a duty that is dictated by reason. This is where his idea of the categorical imperative comes into play. The categorical imperative is Kant's fundamental moral principle, or rule that applies to all rational beings and serves as the foundation for moral behavior. At the heart of the categorical imperative is the idea that moral actions must be guided by principles that could be universally applied. In Kant's view, for an action to be truly moral, it must be something that one could will to become a universal law. For example, if you were considering whether to lie in a particular situation, Kant would ask you to imagine a world in which everyone always lies. If such a world would lead to chaos and the breakdown of trust, then lying cannot be considered a moral action. The test of universality is key. If an action cannot be universalized without contradiction, it is morally impermissible. This principle forms the core of Kant's deontological ethics, an ethical system based on rules and duty rather than on the consequences of actions. For Kant, the concept of goodwill is central to morality. A goodwill is one that acts out of a sense of duty in accordance with the moral law rather than out of self-interest or desire. Even if an action leads to negative outcomes, it can still be considered morally good if it was done with the right intentions. This is a marked departure from utilitarianism, which judges actions based on their consequences. Kant believed that actions are morally right or wrong based on the motives behind them, not the results they produce. In this sense, morality is not about achieving happiness or success. It is about doing what is right because it is right, regardless of the outcome. One of the most striking aspects of Kant's moral philosophy is his insistence on the autonomy of the individual. In Kant's view, human beings are not just passive recipients of moral laws imposed by external authorities. Instead, we are capable of self-governance. We have the ability to use reason to determine what is morally right and to act accordingly. This autonomy is what gives human life its inherent dignity. Kant argued that we must always treat others as ends in themselves, never merely as means to an end. This respect for the inherent worth of individuals is a hallmark of Kant's ethical thought and remains a powerful idea in modern discussions of human rights and dignity. Kant's notion of duty is also deeply connected to his concept of moral law. He believed that moral laws are not arbitrary rules imposed by society or religion, but are instead the product of reason itself. These laws are universal and objective, binding on all rational beings. For Kant, morality is not a matter of personal preference or cultural norms, it is a matter of following the dictates of reason. This is what makes his ethical system so compelling. It offers a way to ground moral behavior in the very nature of human rationality rather than in external authorities or subjective feelings. In addition to the categorical imperative, Kant also introduced the idea of hypothetical imperatives, commands that apply only if one desires a certain outcome. For example, if you want to be healthy, you should exercise and eat well. However, these are not moral imperatives because they are contingent on personal desires. In contrast, the categorical imperative applies unconditionally. It is not dependent on any specific desires or outcomes. It commands us to act in certain ways simply because it is the right thing to do, regardless of what we want or how it benefits us. Kant's emphasis on reason and autonomy also has profound implications for the concept of freedom. For Kant, true freedom is not the ability to do whatever we want, but the ability to act according to rational moral laws. In this sense, freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to govern ourselves according to reason. By following the moral law, we exercise our autonomy and achieve true freedom. This idea of freedom as self-governance is central to Kant's ethical theory, and it provides a stark contrast to other views that equate freedom with the absence of external restrictions. Kant's moral philosophy also addresses the relationship between moral duty and happiness. While many ethical systems, such as utilitarianism, link morality to the pursuit of happiness, Kant argued that the two are distinct. Acting morally does not always lead to happiness, and pursuing happiness does not always lead to moral behavior. For Kant, morality is about fulfilling our duty, regardless of whether it makes us happy. However, he did acknowledge that we all desire happiness, and in an ideal world, morality and happiness would coincide. This ideal is what Kant called the highest good, a state in which virtue and happiness are perfectly aligned. While we may not achieve this in our lifetime, Kant believed that striving for the highest good is an essential part of the moral life. Kant's exploration of practical reason and the development of his moral philosophy had a profound impact on the world of ethics. His insistence on the role of reason, the universality of moral laws, and the autonomy of the individual laid the groundwork for many modern ethical theories and debates. His ideas continue to resonate today, influencing discussions on human rights, justice, and the nature of moral obligation. In the end, Kant's moral philosophy offers a vision of humanity as capable of rational self-governance, bound by a sense of duty, and driven not by personal desires but by the pursuit of what is right. This vision of morality is grounded in reason, autonomy, and universal principles remains one of the most influential and enduring contributions to the field of ethics. As Immanuel Kant's philosophy evolved, he placed increasing emphasis on the concepts of freedom and autonomy, two pillars that he believed were essential for understanding human morality and ethical responsibility. Unlike many philosophers before him, Kant argued that true freedom was not simply the ability to do as one pleased, but rather the capacity to act according to the dictates of moral law, a law derived from reason itself. This profound connection between freedom, autonomy, and moral duty became central to his ethical system, defining what it means to live a life of moral integrity. At the heart of Kant's ethical theory is the idea that human beings are autonomous agents, capable of governing themselves through reason. In this sense, autonomy means more than just independence. It is the ability to determine one's actions based on rational principles rather than external forces or internal desires. For Kant, autonomy is the foundation of moral responsibility. If we are not autonomous, we cannot be held morally accountable for our actions. Moral duty, then, is not something imposed on us from the outside, but something we give to ourselves through the use of reason. This is what Kant meant when he said that humans are self-legislating. We are bound by moral laws that we ourselves, as rational beings, recognize and follow. Kant's view of freedom is closely tied to this notion of autonomy. He rejected the idea that freedom is simply the ability to do whatever we desire. Instead, he argued that true freedom is the ability to act in accordance with moral law, even when it conflicts with our inclinations. In this sense, freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to govern ourselves through reason. According to Kant, when we act out of pure reason and adhere to moral duty, we are exercising our true freedom. This is because we are not being driven by external forces or by our own desires, but by the moral law that we, as rational agents, recognize and choose to follow. This perspective on freedom stands in contrast to more traditional notions of liberty, where freedom is often understood as the absence of external restrictions or as the ability to pursue one's own desires. For Kant, such conceptions of freedom are illusory because they are based on heteronomy, the condition of being governed by something other than one's own rational will. When we act according to desires or external pressures, we are not truly free. We are, in a sense, enslaved by those desires or pressures. True freedom, Kant argued, comes only when we act in accordance with universal moral principles that arise from reason itself. Kant's focus on moral duty is inextricably linked to his views on freedom and autonomy. Moral duty, according to Kant, is not something that can be chosen or rejected based on personal preference. Rather, it is a rational necessity, a demand that reason places on all rational beings. When we act out of duty, we are not simply following a set of arbitrary rules. We are acting according to laws that we, as rational beings, recognize as necessary and binding. This is the essence of Kant's deontological ethics. Morality is not about achieving good outcomes or maximizing happiness, but about following the moral law out of a sense of duty, regardless of the consequences. One of Kant's most famous formulations of this idea is found in the categorical imperative, which, as we saw earlier, commands us to act only in ways that could be universalized, that is, to act only according to maxims that we could will to become a universal law. This universalizability test is Kant's way of ensuring that our actions are grounded in reason and not in personal inclinations or desires. If a proposed action cannot be universalized without contradiction, then it is not morally permissible. For Kant, this test provides a rational, objective basis for morality, one that applies to all rational beings, regardless of their particular circumstances or desires. Kant's emphasis on universal moral laws also ties into his belief in the inherent dignity of human beings. Because we are autonomous agents capable of rational thought, we possess a dignity that must be respected. This dignity, according to Kant, is not contingent on our abilities, achievements, or social status. It is inherent in our very nature as rational beings. For this reason, Kant famously argued that we must always treat others as ends in themselves, never merely as means to an end. This means that we must respect the autonomy and dignity of others, recognizing that they, like us, are bound by the same moral laws and deserve the same respect. This principle of respect for persons is one of the most enduring aspects of Kant's ethical philosophy, and it has had a profound influence on human rights theory and modern ethical thought. Kant's insistence that every individual possesses an intrinsic worth that must be respected has shaped contemporary discussions of justice, equality, and human dignity. It provides a powerful foundation for the idea that all human beings, regardless of their circumstances, are entitled to certain fundamental rights and freedoms simply by virtue of their rational nature. Kant's ideas about freedom, autonomy, and moral duty also have significant implications for the concept of moral responsibility. Because we are autonomous agents, capable of reasoning and acting according to moral laws, we are also responsible for our actions. For Kant, moral responsibility is inseparable from autonomy. If we were not autonomous, if we were merely driven by external forces or internal desires, then we could not be held accountable for our actions. But because we have the capacity for reason, we are responsible for ensuring that our actions conform to the moral law. This connection between autonomy and responsibility also leads Kant to reject the idea that moral worth is tied to the consequences of our actions. While many ethical theories, such as utilitarianism, focus on the outcomes of actions, Kant believed that moral worth resides in the intentions behind the action, not the results. Even if an action leads to negative consequences, it can still be morally good if it was performed out of a sense of duty and in accordance with moral law. This focus on intention rather than outcome is a defining feature of Kant's moral philosophy, and it underscores his belief that morality is ultimately a matter of rational self-governance. In the end, Kant's exploration of freedom, autonomy, and moral duty offers a vision of human beings as rational agents, capable of governing themselves through reason and acting according to universal moral laws. This vision of morality is grounded in autonomy and duty, rather than in external authority or personal desire, remains one of Kant's most enduring contributions to philosophy. His insistence that true freedom comes not from doing whatever we want, but from following the moral law, continues to resonate today, shaping our understanding of ethics, human rights, and personal responsibility. As Immanuel Kant's philosophical ideas developed and spread throughout Europe, they began to influence not only the realm of metaphysics and epistemology but also the fields of politics and ethics. Kant's ethical system, with its emphasis on reason, autonomy, and universal moral laws, resonated far beyond the academic circles of his time, shaping the discourse on human rights, justice, and governance. His philosophy provided a powerful framework for understanding political and ethical issues, grounded in the belief that rational beings are capable of self-governance and that moral laws must apply equally to all. Kant's ideas about autonomy and moral duty had profound implications for political philosophy. Central to Kant's political thought is the notion that individual freedom is inextricably linked to the idea of rational self-governance. Just as individuals are morally autonomous, capable of determining right and wrong through the use of reason, so too should societies be organized around the principle of collective autonomy. For Kant, the legitimacy of political authority depends on the ability of individuals to freely consent to the laws that govern them, provided that these laws are grounded in reason and respect for human dignity. Kant's vision of a just society is one in which individuals are treated not merely as subjects of the state but as equal moral agents. In his work The Metaphysics of Morals, Kant argued that a legitimate political system must respect the inherent dignity of all individuals, recognizing their autonomy and capacity for reason. He believed that political laws, like moral laws, should be universal and impartial, applying equally to all citizens without regard to status, wealth, or power. This emphasis on equality and fairness influenced the development of liberal political theory, which advocates for the protection of individual rights and the establishment of governments based on democratic consent. Kant's political philosophy is also closely tied to his conception of freedom. For Kant, true freedom is not simply the absence of external constraints but the ability to act in accordance with rational moral laws. In a political context, this means that individuals are free when they live under laws that they have rationally chosen and that promote the common good. This concept of republicanism, in which the state is governed by laws that reflect the will of the people, was central to Kant's political thought. He believed that a republic, based on the rule of law, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual rights, was the ideal form of government because it aligned with the principles of reason and autonomy. Kant's influence on political thought extended beyond the theoretical realm. His ideas about the relationship between freedom, law, and autonomy helped shape modern discussions on constitutionalism, democracy, and human rights. Kant's belief that human beings should be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means to an end, laid the groundwork for the development of human rights theory. His emphasis on the universal nature of moral and political laws influenced the idea that all individuals, regardless of their nationality or social status, are entitled to certain fundamental rights simply by virtue of their humanity. This concept became a cornerstone of modern human rights discourse, reflected in documents such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and various national constitutions. One of Kant's most important political contributions was his vision of perpetual peace. In his essay Perpetual Peace, a philosophical sketch, 1795, Kant outlined his plan for achieving lasting peace among nations. At a time when Europe was plagued by war and conflict, Kant proposed a set of principles for establishing a peaceful international order. He argued that wars could be avoided if nations agreed to adhere to a set of rational principles, including the establishment of republican governments, the formation of a federation of free states, and the recognition of the rights of individuals both within and outside their own borders. Kant's idea of perpetual peace was based on the notion that just as individuals are bound by moral laws, so too are nations bound by principles of justice and reason. He believed that republics, where citizens have a say in the laws and decisions that govern them, are less likely to go to war because the people, who bear the costs of war, would be reluctant to support unnecessary conflict. Kant's vision of a federation of free states, bound together by mutual respect for each other's autonomy and sovereignty, was a precursor to modern ideas about international law and global governance. His belief in the importance of diplomacy, dialogue, and mutual respect continues to resonate today, influencing organizations like the United Nations and shaping discussions on international peace and cooperation. Kant's political philosophy also has significant implications for justice and equality. He believed that justice requires the fair and equal treatment of all individuals, regardless of their social status or personal circumstances. In his view, Justice is not merely a matter of following the law, it is about ensuring that the laws themselves are grounded in reason and respect for human dignity. This principle of justice as fairness has had a profound influence on modern political thought, particularly in the works of philosophers like John Rawls, who developed the idea of justice as fairness in his seminal work A Theory of Justice. Kant's emphasis on the universal nature of moral and political laws also extends to his critique of colonialism and imperialism. Although Kant lived in a time when European powers were expanding their empires, he argued that the principles of justice and autonomy apply to all human beings, regardless of their geographical location or cultural background. Kant's belief in the inherent dignity of all individuals led him to condemn the exploitation and subjugation of colonized peoples, insisting that every person, no matter where they live, is entitled to the same basic rights and freedoms. Kant's political philosophy, with its focus on rationality, autonomy, and equality, remains a powerful influence on contemporary political thought. His ideas about constitutional government, human rights, and international peace continue to shape the way we think about politics, governance, and global justice. Kant's insistence that political and moral laws must be universal, grounded in reason, and respectful of human dignity has left an indelible mark on the development of modern democratic societies and remains a guiding principle for those who seek to promote justice and equality in the world. In conclusion, Kant's influence on politics and ethics extends far beyond the academic realm. His ideas about autonomy, freedom, and moral duty have shaped modern conceptions of human rights, democracy, and justice, while his vision of perpetual peace continues to inspire efforts to build a more just and peaceful world. Kant's legacy lives on in the structures of modern democratic societies, in the principles of international law, and in the ongoing pursuit of a more fair and equal world. In addition to his profound contributions to ethics and political philosophy, Immanuel Kant also sought to redefine the relationship between religion and reason. Kant believed that while religious beliefs play a significant role in shaping human morality and behavior, they must be understood and interpreted through the lens of reason. His influential work, Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone, 1793, aimed to reconcile religious faith with the demands of rational inquiry, arguing that true religion must be compatible with the moral principles derived from reason rather than based solely on tradition, superstition, or authority. Kant's central thesis in this work is that religion should serve morality rather than the other way around. In his view, the core of religion lies in the moral law that is accessible to all rational beings, regardless of their specific religious beliefs or practices. For Kant, morality does not depend on divine revelation or religious doctrine, it is grounded in practical reason, the capacity of human beings to discern what is right through rational reflection. This means that while religious teachings may offer valuable guidance, they must ultimately align with the moral law that can be known through reason. In Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone, Kant explored the idea that moral principles are universal and apply to all human beings, regardless of their religious affiliation. He argued that the essence of true religion is found in the ethical teachings it offers, rather than in the rituals, dogmas, or supernatural elements that often accompany religious traditions. For Kant, the moral core of religion, the teachings about how we should treat one another, how we should act justly, and how we should live ethically, was of far greater importance than questions of theology or metaphysics. He believed that reason, not faith, must be the ultimate guide in determining how to live a moral life. Kant's approach to religion was deeply influenced by his broader ethical system, particularly his belief in the categorical imperative, the idea that we should act only according to maxims that we came to become universal laws. He saw religious teachings as a means of reinforcing the moral duties that reason reveals to us, but he insisted that these teachings must be evaluated critically and rationally. In other words, religious beliefs are valid insofar as they promote ethical behavior and align with the principles of reason. Kant rejected the idea that morality depends on divine command. Instead, he believed that moral duties exist independently of religious belief and are accessible to all rational beings. Kant also addressed the concept of radical evil in human nature, an idea that had long been central to Christian theology. He argued that while humans possess an innate tendency towards selfishness and immorality, they are also endowed with the capacity for moral improvement through the use of reason. In this sense, Kant saw religion as a way of helping individuals recognize their moral obligations and overcome their natural inclinations towards self-interest. However, he believed that this moral improvement could only occur if individuals freely chose to follow the moral law rather than relying on divine intervention or seeking rewards in the afterlife. One of the most controversial aspects of Kant's religious philosophy was his assertion that moral faith, the belief in God and an afterlife, should be understood as a practical necessity rather than a matter of theoretical knowledge. Kant argued that while we cannot prove the existence of God or the immortality of the soul through reason alone, these beliefs serve an important moral function. They provide hope and motivation for individuals to strive for moral perfection, even in the face of adversity. In this sense, faith in God and an afterlife supports the pursuit of the highest good, where virtue and happiness are perfectly aligned. However, Kant was careful to distinguish this moral faith from the kinds of dogmatic religious belief that are based on unprovable metaphysical claims. Kant's distinction between moral faith and theoretical reason is crucial to understanding his philosophy of religion. He believed that while theoretical reason can tell us much about the natural world and the limits of human knowledge, it cannot provide definitive answers to metaphysical questions such as the existence of God or the nature of the afterlife. These questions, Kant argued, fall outside the scope of reason's capabilities. However, practical reason, the capacity to act according to moral principles, requires us to believe in certain metaphysical ideas, such as the existence of a just God and an afterlife, in order to maintain hope in the moral order of the universe. Thus, while we cannot know these things through reason, we are justified in holding these beliefs as matters of moral faith. In many ways, Kant's philosophy of religion was a response to the Enlightenment emphasis on reason and skepticism. He sought to preserve the ethical teachings of religion while distancing them from the metaphysical claims that often led to conflict and dogmatism. Kant believed that by grounding religion in reason and morality, we could retain its ethical benefits without falling into the traps of superstition or fanaticism. In this sense, Kant's work represents a bridge between the rationalism of the Enlightenment and the ethical concerns of religious traditions. Kant's ideas about religion also had significant implications for political philosophy and tolerance. He argued that religious belief should be a matter of personal conscience, not something imposed by the state or enforced through external authority. In a just society, individuals must be free to practice their religion as they see fit, provided that their beliefs do not conflict with the moral law or infringe on the rights of others. This emphasis on religious freedom and tolerance was a key part of Kant's broader political vision, and it influenced later debates about the role of religion in public life. Kant's efforts to ground religion in reason and morality continue to resonate today, particularly in discussions about the role of religion in a pluralistic society. His insistence that religious beliefs must be subject to rational scrutiny has shaped modern views on secularism, tolerance, and the separation of church and state. At the same time, his recognition of the ethical value of religious teachings has allowed for a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between religion and morality, one that respects both the demands of reason and the importance of faith in the pursuit of the highest good. In conclusion, Kant's exploration of religion within the limits of reason offers a compelling vision of how faith and reason can coexist harmoniously. By grounding religious belief in the principles of practical reason and emphasizing the moral core of religion, Kant sought to preserve the ethical teachings of religious traditions while avoiding the pitfalls of dogmatism and superstition. His work continues to influence contemporary discussions about the role of religion in public life, the relationship between faith and reason, and the nature of moral responsibility in a modern world. As Immanuel Kant's career advanced into his later years, his influence on the philosophical world only deepened. His earlier works, such as the Critique of Pure Reason and the groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, had already established him as one of the most significant thinkers of his time. However, Kant did not stop there. In the final decades of his life, he continued to produce profound works that expanded on his original ideas, addressing questions of aesthetics, teleology, and the boundaries of human knowledge. These later works solidified his reputation as a foundational figure in modern philosophy and ensured that his legacy would endure for generations to come. One of Kant's most significant later works is the Critique of Judgment, Kritik der Urteilskraft, published in 1790. In this work, Kant turned his attention to aesthetics, the philosophy of beauty and art, and teleology, the study of purpose or design in nature. The book was a natural extension of his previous critiques, seeking to bridge the gap between the world of nature, governed by laws of cause and effect, and the world of freedom, governed by moral laws. Kant asked a fundamental question: how can we reconcile our experience of beauty, which seems subjective, with the idea that the world is governed by objective, universal laws? In the Critique of Judgment, Kant introduced the idea that aesthetic judgments, such as when we say that something is beautiful, are unique because they are subjective but universal. When we find something beautiful, we experience a feeling of pleasure that is not based on any personal interest or desire, but rather on a sense of harmony between our faculties of imagination and understanding. This sense of harmony gives rise to a judgment of beauty that, while subjective, carries a universal validity. In other words, when we declare something to be beautiful, we do so with the expectation that others will agree, even though our judgment is based on personal experience. This idea of universal subjective judgment had a profound influence on later philosophers, particularly in the fields of aesthetics and art theory. Kant's exploration of teleology, the study of purpose or design in nature, was equally groundbreaking. In the Critique of Judgment, Kant examined the idea that living organisms seem to be designed for a purpose, as their parts work together in a harmonious, goal-directed way. While Kant acknowledged that we often perceive organisms as having a purposeful design, he argued that this perception does not imply the existence of a divine designer. Instead, Kant proposed that teleological judgments are a product of the way our minds interpret the world. We are naturally inclined to see purpose and order in nature because of the way our cognitive faculties are structured. However, this does not mean that nature itself is inherently purposeful, only that we interpret it as such. Kant's teleological ideas influenced later debates about evolution, natural design, and the limits of human knowledge. Kant's later works also revisited many of the themes from his earlier writings, particularly his ideas about freedom, morality, and the limits of human reason. As he grew older, Kant became increasingly concerned with the tension between individual freedom and the constraints of society. He continued to argue that true freedom comes from following the moral law, a law that is dictated by reason, not by personal inclinations or external pressures. However, Kant also recognized that living according to moral principles is not always easy, especially in a world where human desires and social demands often conflict with ethical duty. In his later years, Kant also reflected on the limits of human reason. He had always maintained that while human beings are capable of great intellectual achievements, there are certain questions, such as the existence of God or the nature of the soul, that lie beyond the scope of reason. In his later writings, Kant reaffirmed this view, cautioning against the dangers of metaphysical speculation. He believed that reason must always be tempered by practical wisdom, the understanding that not all of life's mysteries can be solved by logic alone. This humility in the face of the unknown became a defining feature of Kant's philosophy and distinguished him from many of his contemporaries who sought definitive answers to life's most profound questions. Despite his declining health in the last years of his life, Kant remained intellectually active until the very end. He continued to correspond with other philosophers and scholars, offering guidance and feedback on their work. However, by the mid-1790s, Kant's health had begun to deteriorate significantly. He suffered from memory loss and physical weakness, but even as his body and mind began to fail him, Kant remained devoted to his philosophical pursuits. He passed away in 1804 at the age of 79, leaving behind a legacy that would forever shape the course of Western philosophy. Kant's death marked the end of an era, but his ideas continued to resonate long after his passing. His work had a profound influence on German idealism, particularly on philosophers like Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling, and George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who built on Kant's ideas about freedom, knowledge, and the nature of reality. Hegel, in particular, took up Kant's challenge of reconciling the world of nature with the world of freedom, developing a system of dialectical reasoning that sought to unify the contradictions in Kant's thought. Kant's influence extended far beyond Germany. His ideas about ethics, morality, and autonomy laid the groundwork for much of modern moral philosophy, influencing thinkers like John Stuart Mill, Jean-Paul Sartre, and John Rawls. Rawls's concept of justice as fairness, for example, draws heavily on Kant's idea that moral principles must be universal and must respect the autonomy of individuals. Kant's emphasis on the dignity of all human beings and the importance of treating others as ends in themselves continues to shape contemporary debates about human rights and social justice. Kant's ideas about epistemology and the limits of human knowledge also had a lasting impact on modern science and philosophy of mind. His distinction between the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it, and the noumenal world, the world as it exists independently of our perceptions, has been echoed in discussions about the nature of reality, perception, and consciousness. In the field of cognitive science, Kant's insights into the active role of the mind in shaping our experiences paved the way for later theories about how the brain constructs reality from sensory input. Today, Kant's legacy is felt in nearly every area of philosophy. His work on ethics continues to provide a foundation for contemporary discussions of moral responsibility and human rights. His contributions to political philosophy have shaped modern democratic thought, influencing ideas about liberty, equality, and justice. And his exploration of knowledge and perception remains a cornerstone of epistemology and philosophy of science. In conclusion, Kant's later works and philosophical legacy are a testament to the depth and breadth of his thought. From his explorations of aesthetics and teleology to his reflections on morality, freedom, and the limits of reason, Kant's ideas have left an indelible mark on the intellectual history of the modern world. His philosophy continues to challenge, inspire, and guide us as we seek to understand ourselves and the world around us, reminding us of the power of reason, the importance of moral duty, and the value of human dignity. Immanuel Kant's ethical philosophy continues to have a profound influence on the way we think about moral responsibility, human dignity, and justice in the modern world. His ideas about the autonomy of individuals, the universal nature of moral laws, and the importance of treating others as ends in themselves have become foundational concepts in discussions about human rights, ethics, and social justice. Even today, Kant's philosophy serves as a guiding framework for those seeking to understand the nature of moral obligation and the principles that should govern human behavior. One of Kant's most enduring contributions to modern ethics is his emphasis on autonomy, the idea that human beings are capable of rational self-governance and that true morality arises from acting according to principles that we choose for ourselves, not from external pressures or desires. In Kant's view, autonomy is what gives human beings their inherent dignity. It is the capacity for reason and moral reflection that allows individuals to determine what is right and wrong and to act accordingly. This focus on autonomy has had a lasting impact on contemporary discussions of individual rights and moral responsibility. Kant's insistence that individuals should be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means to an end, has become a cornerstone of modern human rights theory. For Kant, each person possesses an intrinsic worth that demands respect, regardless of their social status, abilities, or circumstances. This idea has influenced the development of human rights documents around the world, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which reflects Kant's belief in the equal moral worth of all individuals. The idea that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect simply by virtue of their humanity has shaped modern legal and political systems, particularly in democratic societies where the protection of individual rights is paramount. Kant's concept of universal moral laws also plays a central role in modern ethical thought. He believed that moral principles must be universal, applicable to all rational beings in all situations. This means that for an action to be morally right, it must be something that we could consistently will for everyone to do. Kant's categorical imperative, which commands us to act only according to maxims that we can will to become universal laws, provides a rational framework for evaluating the morality of actions. This principle of universality has had a profound influence on modern discussions of justice, particularly in the areas of human rights, social justice, and global ethics. For example, Kant's emphasis on universal moral laws is reflected in modern debates about global justice and the responsibilities that nations have toward one another. Kant's belief that morality is not limited by borders, that the same ethical principles apply to all people, regardless of nationality, has influenced contemporary discussions about international law, humanitarian intervention, and global cooperation. Kant's vision of a world governed by rational, universal principles continues to inspire those who advocate for a more just and equitable global order. Kant's ethical system also provides a strong foundation for understanding the concept of moral responsibility. He believed that individuals are morally responsible for their actions because they are capable of reasoning and making choices. This idea of moral responsibility is central to modern legal and political systems, where individuals are held accountable for their actions because they are seen as rational agents who can distinguish between right and wrong. Kant's insistence that moral responsibility is tied to autonomy has influenced discussions about free will, accountability, and justice, particularly in the context of criminal justice and human rights. In the field of bioethics, Kant's emphasis on autonomy and human dignity has played a significant role in shaping modern debates about medical ethics, patient rights, and the ethics of scientific research. Kant's belief that individuals must always be treated as ends in themselves, not as means to an end, has influenced discussions about informed consent, medical experimentation, and the ethical treatment of vulnerable populations. His ideas continue to inform contemporary debates about the rights of patients, the ethical obligations of doctors, and the moral implications of advances in biotechnology. Kant's influence can also be seen in modern debates about environmental ethics. While Kant himself did not address environmental issues directly, his emphasis on the moral duty to act according to universal principles has inspired contemporary environmental philosophers to consider the ethical responsibilities that human beings have toward the natural world. Kant's idea that we must act in ways that respect the autonomy and dignity of all rational beings has been extended to include concerns about animal rights, environmental stewardship, and the moral obligation to preserve the planet for future generations. One of the most enduring aspects of Kant's ethical philosophy is his belief in the power of reason to guide human behavior. Kant was convinced that human beings are capable of discerning moral truths through the use of reason, and that it is through rational reflection that we come to understand our moral duties. This faith in the power of reason has had a lasting impact on modern philosophy, particularly in the areas of moral psychology and cognitive science, where researchers continue to explore the relationship between reason, emotion, and moral decision-making. Kant's insistence that reason should be the foundation of morality has also influenced modern discussions about the role of religion in public life, particularly in debates about the separation of church and state and the need for secular, rational approaches to ethical issues. Kant's ethical philosophy, with its emphasis on autonomy, dignity, and universal moral laws, continues to shape the way we think about human rights, justice, and moral responsibility in the modern world. His ideas have influenced everything from legal theory to bioethics to environmental philosophy, providing a rational framework for addressing the ethical challenges of contemporary life. Kant's belief in the inherent worth of every individual and his insistence that morality must be grounded in reason and universal principles remain as relevant today as they were in the 18th century. In conclusion, Kant's influence on modern ethics and human rights is profound and far-reaching. His emphasis on autonomy, dignity, and universal moral laws has shaped the development of human rights theory, informed discussions about justice and global ethics, and provided a foundation for understanding moral responsibility in a wide range of contexts. Kant's ideas continue to inspire those who seek to build a more just, equitable, and rational world, where individuals are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. Immanuel Kant's work is often seen as the pinnacle of Enlightenment thought, a period characterized by the belief in the power of reason, science, and individual freedom. Kant's contributions to this intellectual movement were immense, as he provided a framework for understanding the role of reason in human life and emphasized the importance of intellectual autonomy. One of his most famous essays, What is Enlightenment? 1784, encapsulates his view that the Enlightenment was a call for individuals to free themselves from the constraints of dogma and authority, to think for themselves, and to trust in their own ability to reason. In What is Enlightenment, Kant famously defined enlightenment as man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. By immaturity, Kant meant the inability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another. He argued that this immaturity was not a result of a lack of intellect, but rather a lack of courage, the courage to think independently and to question established norms and authorities. Kant's rallying cry was encapsulated in the phrase sapere aude, or dare to know, which became the slogan of the Enlightenment. For Kant, the Enlightenment was about intellectual freedom, the freedom to use one's reason without being subjected to external forces such as religious authority, political rulers, or societal pressures. Kant's emphasis on intellectual freedom was closely tied to his broader ideas about autonomy and moral responsibility. Just as individuals must be free to act according to moral laws that they recognize through reason, they must also be free to think independently and to seek knowledge for themselves. For Kant, intellectual freedom was not just a personal right, but a moral duty. It was the responsibility of each individual to cultivate their reason, to seek knowledge, and to challenge the assumptions that had been imposed upon them by tradition and authority. This call for intellectual independence resonated with the broader aims of the Enlightenment, which sought to break free from the constraints of superstition, dogma, and ignorance. Kant's vision of the Enlightenment also had significant political implications. He believed that a society could only be truly free if its citizens were intellectually autonomous, capable of reasoning for themselves and making informed decisions about how they should be governed. In this sense, Kant's ideas about political freedom were inseparable from his ideas about intellectual freedom. He argued that rulers should not impose their own beliefs on their subjects, but should instead allow individuals to freely express their ideas, debate, and engage in rational discourse. This principle of freedom of thought became a cornerstone of democratic ideals and influenced later discussions about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to dissent. Kant also addressed the tension between freedom and authority in his discussion of public versus private reason. He argued that while individuals should be free to use their reason in public, such as in academic discourse, journalism, and philosophical debate, they may still have obligations to follow certain rules in their private roles, such as those of soldiers, civil servants, or clergy. In these roles, individuals may be required to obey the laws and regulations of their institutions, but this obedience does not negate their right to think critically and express their opinions publicly. Kant believed that this distinction between public and private reason allowed for both the maintenance of social order and the cultivation of intellectual freedom. Kant's call for intellectual independence was not without its challenges. He recognized that many people were reluctant to use their own reason because it was often more comfortable to follow the guidance of others, whether religious leaders, political authorities, or societal norms. However, he argued that this reliance on external authority was a form of intellectual laziness, a refusal to take responsibility for one's own thoughts and actions. Kant believed that the Enlightenment project was about encouraging individuals to overcome this laziness, to reject the passive acceptance of tradition, and to embrace the active pursuit of knowledge. In many ways, Kant's views on the Enlightenment can be seen as a response to the political and social conditions of his time. The 18th century was a period of great intellectual and political upheaval, with new ideas about science, government, and religion challenging the established order. Kant's philosophy was a reflection of this broader movement, as he sought to provide a rational foundation for individual freedom and moral responsibility. His insistence that human beings are capable of rational self-governance was a powerful counter to the prevailing view that people needed to be guided by external authorities in matters of thought and action. Kant's ideas about the Enlightenment were also deeply connected to his ethical philosophy, particularly his belief in the dignity of human beings as rational agents. For Kant, the ability to think independently and to act according to moral principles was what gave human life its inherent value. This belief in the power of reason and the moral autonomy of individuals became a central theme in his ethical writings and influenced later discussions about human rights, freedom of conscience, and democracy. Kant's emphasis on intellectual freedom also laid the groundwork for secularism, as he argued that reason, rather than religious doctrine, should be the ultimate guide in both public and private life. Kant's vision of enlightenment also had important implications for education. He believed that the role of education was not merely to transmit knowledge from one generation to the next, but to cultivate the capacity for independent thought. In his view, education should encourage students to question, to think critically, and to seek knowledge for themselves, rather than simply accepting the views of their teachers or the established authorities. This emphasis on critical thinking has had a lasting impact on modern educational philosophy, particularly in the development of liberal education and the promotion of academic freedom. Kant's influence on the Enlightenment extended far beyond his own time. His ideas about the autonomy of reason, the importance of intellectual freedom, and the right to dissent have shaped the development of modern liberal democracies, where the freedom of thought and freedom of speech are enshrined as fundamental rights. His insistence that individuals must have the courage to think for themselves and to challenge the assumptions of their society continues to resonate today, as we face new challenges to intellectual freedom in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. In conclusion, Kant's contributions to the Enlightenment were instrumental in shaping the intellectual landscape of the modern world. His call for intellectual freedom, his belief in the power of reason, and his commitment to the dignity of the individual continue to inspire those who seek to promote knowledge, justice, and freedom in all areas of life. Kant's legacy as a philosopher of the Enlightenment remains as relevant today as it was in the 18th century, reminding us of the importance of thinking independently, acting morally, and striving for a world where all individuals can exercise their right to freedom of thought. Immanuel Kant's work has had a lasting impact not only on ethics and political philosophy but also on modern science and the philosophy of mind. His ideas about epistemology, the study of knowledge, and the way the human mind interacts with the world were groundbreaking and continue to shape our understanding of cognition, perception, and the nature of reality. Kant's efforts to reconcile the insights of empiricism and rationalism paved the way for a new understanding of how we acquire knowledge and how the mind shapes our experience of the world. His ideas are especially relevant today, influencing everything from cognitive science to quantum mechanics. At the heart of Kant's contribution to modern science is his theory of transcendental idealism, which he introduced in the Critique of Pure Reason. Kant argued that while we experience the world through our senses, the mind plays an active role in shaping that experience. According to Kant, the phenomenal world, the world as we perceive it, is not a direct reflection of objective reality but is instead mediated by the structures of the mind, such as space, time, and causality. These structures are a priori, meaning they exist in the mind prior to any experience and allow us to organize and interpret sensory information. For Kant, this meant that we can never know the noumenal world, the world as it exists in itself, independent of our perceptions, because all of our knowledge is filtered through the mental categories that shape our experience. This distinction between the phenomenal and noumenal worlds was a major departure from the philosophical traditions of empiricism and rationalism. Empiricists like John Locke and David Hume had argued that all knowledge comes from sensory experience, while rationalists like René Descartes believed that certain knowledge could be derived purely through reason, independent of the senses. Kant's transcendental idealism offered a middle ground between these two views, suggesting that while all knowledge begins with experience, the mind plays an active role in structuring that experience. This insight laid the foundation for much of modern cognitive science, which explores how the brain processes sensory information and constructs our perception of reality. Kant's ideas about the active role of the mind in shaping experience also anticipated many of the developments in 20th century physics, particularly in the field of quantum mechanics. In the early 20th century, physicists like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg began to explore the strange and counterintuitive behavior of particles at the quantum level, where the act of observation itself seemed to influence the outcome of experiments. This idea, that the observer plays an active role in shaping reality, echoes Kant's claim that the mind is not a passive recipient of information but actively structures and interprets the data it receives. Although Kant was not a physicist, his insights into the limitations of human knowledge and the way the mind interacts with the world resonate with many of the philosophical questions raised by quantum theory. Kant's influence on the philosophy of mind is equally profound. His distinction between the phenomenal and noumenal worlds has shaped contemporary discussions about the nature of consciousness, perception, and reality. Kant's claim that we can never fully know the noumenal world because all of our experiences are mediated by the mind raises important questions about the nature of subjective experience and the limits of human knowledge. In the field of phenomenology, philosophers like Edmund Husserl and Maurice Merleau-Ponty built on Kant's ideas to explore the nature of human perception and the way that consciousness shapes our experience of the world. In cognitive science, Kant's insights into the active role of the mind have been instrumental in the development of constructivist theories of perception. These theories argue that the brain constructs a model of the world based on the information it receives from the senses, but that this model is always an interpretation shaped by the brain's inherent structures and limitations. In this sense, our experience of reality is always a construction rather than a direct reflection of the external world. Kant's claim that space, time, and causality are a priori categories that structure our experience anticipates many of the findings in neuroscience, where researchers have discovered that the brain organizes sensory input in ways that allow us to navigate and make sense of the world, but that these processes are not always a perfect mirror of objective reality. Kant's work also continues to influence artificial intelligence and robotics, particularly in the development of machine learning and the study of consciousness. Researchers in AI are grappling with many of the same questions that Kant explored in his philosophy. How do we acquire knowledge? What is the relationship between the mind and the external world? Can machines be conscious in the way that humans are? Kant's insights into the nature of human cognition, particularly his idea that the mind actively shapes and organizes information, provide a valuable framework for understanding the challenges and possibilities of creating artificial systems that can perceive, learn, and make decisions in a way that resembles human thought. One of the key aspects of Kant's epistemology that continues to resonate with scientists and philosophers alike is his skepticism about the limits of human knowledge. Kant argued that while we can know a great deal about the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it, we are inherently limited in our ability to understand the noumenal world. This humility in the face of the unknown is a central theme in both modern science and philosophy, where researchers are constantly pushing the boundaries of knowledge while recognizing that there will always be aspects of reality that remain beyond our grasp. Kant's insistence that reason has limits continues to inspire scientists and philosophers to explore the unknown while remaining mindful of the complexities and mysteries of the universe. Kant's ideas about the nature of moral action and the role of autonomy have also influenced contemporary discussions in the philosophy of mind. His belief that moral actions must stem from rational self-governance rather than external influences has shaped debates about free will, moral responsibility, and the nature of human agency. Philosophers like Thomas Nagel and Harry Frankfurt have built on Kant's ideas to explore the relationship between consciousness and moral decision-making, asking whether human beings are truly free to make moral choices or whether our decisions are determined by factors beyond our control. Kant's emphasis on autonomy, the ability to act according to principles that we give to ourselves through reason, remains a powerful concept in contemporary discussions about ethics and the philosophy of mind. In the realm of modern science, Kant's legacy is particularly evident in discussions about the nature of time and space. Kant argued that space and time are not features of the external world but are instead categories of the mind that structure our experience of reality. This idea has been echoed in modern physics, particularly in Einstein's theory of relativity, which showed that time and space are not absolute, but relative to the observer. Kant's insight that our experience of time and space is shaped by the way our minds interpret sensory information anticipated many of the breakthroughs in modern physics, where the nature of time and space continues to be a central question. In conclusion, Kant's influence on modern science and the philosophy of mind is profound and far-reaching. His ideas about the nature of knowledge, the role of the mind in shaping experience, and the limits of human understanding continue to resonate with scientists and philosophers today. From quantum mechanics to cognitive science, Kant's insights into the nature of reality and the workings of the human mind remain as relevant and inspiring as ever, challenging us to think more deeply about the nature of knowledge, perception, and the mysteries of existence. Immanuel Kant's contributions to political philosophy have left an indelible mark on the development of modern democratic thought. His ideas about freedom, autonomy, and the rule of law have shaped how we think about the role of individuals in society, the nature of government, and the principles of justice and equality that underpin democratic institutions. Kant's vision of a society governed by rational, autonomous individuals acting in accordance with universal moral laws has become a cornerstone of modern liberal democratic theory. At the heart of Kant's political philosophy is the belief in individual autonomy, the idea that human beings are capable of governing themselves through the use of reason. Kant argued that individuals are not merely passive subjects who must be ruled by external authorities. Rather, they are rational agents capable of determining their own actions and making moral decisions based on universal principles. This emphasis on autonomy has had a profound influence on modern political thought, particularly in discussions about human rights, freedom, and the legitimacy of political authority. Kant's concept of freedom is closely tied to his ethical and political philosophy. For Kant, true freedom is not simply the absence of external constraints or the ability to do whatever one desires. Instead, freedom is the ability to act according to moral laws that one has chosen for oneself through the exercise of reason. This notion of self-governance is central to Kant's understanding of both personal morality and political justice. In a just society, individuals must be free to act in accordance with the moral law, and political systems must be designed to respect and protect this autonomy. Kant's political philosophy is also grounded in his idea of the categorical imperative, which he applied not only to personal morality but also to the structure of society. The categorical imperative commands us to act only in ways that we could will to become universal laws. In a political context, this means that laws must be just, impartial, and applicable to all citizens equally. Kant's belief in universal principles of justice has been a key influence on modern discussions about constitutionalism, the rule of law, and the protection of individual rights. A legitimate political system, according to Kant, is one that operates according to laws that are both rational and fair, treating all citizens with respect and ensuring that their rights are protected. Kant's political ideas are closely tied to his vision of a republican form of government. He believed that a republic, based on the rule of law, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual freedoms, was the ideal political system. In a republic, citizens have a say in the laws and decisions that govern them, and political power is exercised in accordance with principles of justice and fairness. Kant's belief in popular sovereignty, the idea that political authority derives from the consent of the governed, has had a profound influence on the development of democracy and modern political systems. His vision of a society in which individuals are both free and morally bound by universal laws continues to resonate in contemporary debates about democratic governance and the nature of political authority. One of Kant's most significant contributions to political thought is his emphasis on the rule of law. Kant believed that the rule of law is essential for ensuring that individuals are treated with dignity and respect, and that justice is applied fairly and impartially. For Kant, a just society is one in which individuals are free to exercise their autonomy, but where their actions are governed by laws that reflect universal moral principles. This idea has been a major influence on modern discussions about the importance of constitutional government, where laws are designed to protect individual rights and to ensure that political power is exercised fairly and transparently. Kant's political philosophy also addresses the tension between freedom and authority. While he believed in the importance of individual freedom, he also recognized that living in a society requires individuals to submit to certain laws and regulations for the sake of social order. However, for Kant, these laws must be based on rational principles that respect the autonomy of individuals. Laws that are arbitrary or that infringe on individual rights are not legitimate in Kant's view. Instead, political authority must be justified by its adherence to universal principles of justice. This emphasis on rational legitimacy has had a lasting impact on modern political theory, particularly in debates about the limits of government authority and the right to dissent. Kant's ideas about freedom, autonomy, and justice also had a significant influence on the development of human rights theory. His belief that all individuals possess an inherent dignity and must be treated as ends in themselves has shaped modern discussions about equality, human rights, and the protection of individual freedoms. Kant's insistence that moral and political laws must be universal and impartial has influenced the development of international human rights documents, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which enshrines the principle that all human beings are entitled to certain basic rights, regardless of their nationality, race, or social status. In his essay Perpetual Peace, a Philosophical Sketch, 1795, Kant also addressed the question of how nations can achieve lasting peace in the international arena. Kant believed that wars could be prevented if nations agreed to follow certain rational principles, such as the establishment of republican governments, the formation of a federation of free states, and the recognition of the rights of individuals both within and beyond their own borders. Kant's vision of perpetual peace was based on the idea that just as individuals are bound by moral laws, so too are nations bound by principles of justice and reason. His ideas about international cooperation and the importance of respecting the sovereignty and autonomy of nations have influenced modern discussions about international law, global governance, and the pursuit of peace through diplomatic means. Kant's ideas about cosmopolitanism, the belief that all human beings belong to a single global community and are entitled to certain universal rights, are also deeply relevant to contemporary discussions about global justice and humanitarian intervention. Kant believed that political boundaries should not prevent individuals from enjoying the moral rights to which they are entitled as rational beings. This idea of a universal moral community has influenced modern debates about global inequality, immigration, and the responsibility of wealthy nations to assist those in need. In conclusion, Kant's impact on modern political philosophy and democracy is profound. His emphasis on individual autonomy, universal moral principles, and the rule of law has shaped the development of modern democratic systems and continues to influence contemporary discussions about freedom, justice, and human rights. Kant's vision of a society governed by rational, autonomous individuals acting in accordance with universal laws remains a powerful ideal, guiding efforts to create political systems that respect the dignity and freedom of all individuals. Immanuel Kant's ideas about justice are deeply intertwined with his moral philosophy, particularly his belief in the categorical imperative and the principle of universal law. Kant's vision of justice is grounded in the idea that moral laws must be applicable to all rational beings, that justice requires the equal and fair treatment of all individuals, and that individuals bear moral responsibility for their actions. His contributions to the concept of justice continue to influence contemporary debates on human rights, criminal justice, and the ethical principles that should guide legal and political systems. At the core of Kant's idea of justice is the belief in universal moral principles. According to Kant, true justice cannot be based on personal preferences, cultural norms, or arbitrary laws. Instead, it must be grounded in principles that are rational and universal, meaning they apply equally to all individuals, regardless of their specific circumstances. This idea is closely tied to Kant's categorical imperative, which commands us to act only in ways that we could will to become universal laws. In a just society, laws must be designed to respect the autonomy and dignity of all individuals, and they must be applied fairly and impartially. Kant's conception of justice is also deeply connected to his ideas about freedom and autonomy. For Kant, individuals are free only when they are able to act in accordance with rational moral laws. In this sense, Justice is not just about protecting individual rights, but also about creating a legal and political system that allows individuals to exercise their autonomy. Kant believed that the rule of law is essential for ensuring justice, as it provides a framework in which individuals can be free to act according to their own reason without infringing on the rights of others. However, the laws themselves must be just, meaning they must be based on universal principles that respect the moral autonomy of all individuals. Kant's emphasis on the universal nature of moral laws has had a profound impact on modern discussions about human rights and equality. Kant believed that all human beings possess an inherent dignity that must be respected, regardless of their social status, race, or nationality. This belief in the equal moral worth of all individuals has shaped contemporary debates about justice and the protection of human rights. Kant's insistence that justice must be based on principles that apply equally to all people is reflected in modern human rights documents, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which enshrines the principle that all individuals are entitled to certain basic rights and freedoms simply by virtue of being human. Kant's ideas about justice also have significant implications for criminal justice. He believed that individuals are morally responsible for their actions because they are rational agents capable of distinguishing between right and wrong. This means that when individuals violate the moral law, they must be held accountable for their actions. However, Kant rejected the idea that punishment should be based on retribution or revenge. Instead, he argued that punishment should be guided by the principle of justice. It should be proportionate to the crime and based on rational laws that apply equally to all individuals. For Kant, punishment serves a moral function. It upholds the integrity of the moral law and affirms the autonomy of individuals by holding them accountable for their actions. In Kant's view, justice in the criminal system should not focus on deterrence or rehabilitation alone. Instead, it should be rooted in the idea that individuals, as rational beings, must face the consequences of their actions in accordance with universal laws. However, Kant was also concerned with ensuring that punishment respects the dignity of individuals. He opposed cruel or inhumane forms of punishment, insisting that even those who violate the law must be treated as ends in themselves, not as mere means to achieving social order. This belief in the dignity of all individuals, including those who have committed crimes, continues to influence modern discussions about criminal justice reform and the ethical treatment of prisoners. Kant's approach to justice is also closely tied to his ideas about moral responsibility. He believed that justice requires individuals to take responsibility for their actions and that society must hold people accountable for the choices they make. However, Kant also recognized that justice requires a fair and impartial system of laws that are based on reason and that apply equally to all individuals. This idea has influenced contemporary discussions about legal fairness and due process, particularly in debates about the presumption of innocence, equal protection under the law, and the importance of ensuring that legal systems are free from bias or discrimination. Kant's emphasis on moral responsibility also extends to the concept of justice between nations. In his essay Perpetual Peace, Kant argued that just as individuals are bound by moral laws, so too are nations. He believed that international justice requires nations to respect each other's sovereignty and to act in accordance with principles of fairness and mutual respect. Kant's vision of international justice was grounded in the belief that all human beings belong to a single moral community and that nations, like individuals, are bound by universal moral laws. This idea of a global moral community has had a profound influence on modern discussions about international law, humanitarian intervention, and the responsibility to protect. Kant's ideas about cosmopolitanism, the belief that all human beings are entitled to certain rights and responsibilities regardless of their national affiliation, are also deeply relevant to contemporary discussions about global justice. He argued that individuals should not be treated differently simply because they are citizens of a particular country. Instead, justice requires that all individuals be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their nationality or citizenship status. This idea has influenced modern debates about immigration, global inequality, and the rights of refugees and stateless persons. Kant's vision of a world governed by universal moral principles continues to resonate today as we grapple with the ethical challenges of a globalized world. Kant's concept of justice also has implications for economic justice. While Kant himself did not develop a detailed theory of economics, his belief in the equal moral worth of all individuals has inspired contemporary debates about fairness, equality, and distributive justice. Kant's insistence that justice must be based on universal principles that apply equally to all, has influenced discussions about economic inequality and the just distribution of resources. Many modern thinkers have built on Kant's ideas to argue that justice requires not only the protection of individual rights but also the creation of a system in which all individuals have access to the resources they need to live a dignified life. In conclusion, Kant's contributions to the concept of justice are both profound and far-reaching. His emphasis on universal moral principles, moral responsibility, and the dignity of all individuals continues to shape contemporary discussions about human rights, criminal justice, and the ethical foundations of legal and political systems. Kant's vision of justice as grounded in reason, autonomy, and respect for the moral worth of all individuals remains a powerful and enduring ideal, guiding efforts to create a more just and equitable world. Immanuel Kant's ideas on cosmopolitanism have had a lasting impact on modern discussions about global justice, human rights, and the concept of global citizenship. Kant envisioned a world in which individuals, regardless of their nationality or geographic location, are treated with dignity and respect, and where the moral rights of every person are upheld. His belief that all human beings belong to a single, universal moral community laid the groundwork for contemporary debates about international law, global governance, and the responsibilities that nations have toward one another and to humanity as a whole. Kant's concept of cosmopolitanism is rooted in his broader ethical theory, particularly his belief in the universality of moral laws. According to Kant, moral principles apply to all rational beings, regardless of their specific cultural, national, or personal circumstances. This means that the ethical obligations we have toward one another are not limited by political borders or national identities. They extend to all human beings by virtue of our shared capacity for reason. For Kant, the idea of a global moral community is essential to the pursuit of justice and peace in the world. One of Kant's most significant contributions to the idea of cosmopolitanism is his belief in the inherent dignity of every individual. In his moral philosophy, Kant argued that each person is an end in themselves and must never be treated merely as a means to an end. This idea has profound implications for how we think about international relations and the responsibilities that nations have toward individuals, both within and beyond their own borders. Kant's vision of cosmopolitanism calls for a world in which the rights and dignity of all individuals are respected, regardless of their nationality or social status. In his essay Perpetual Peace, a philosophical sketch, 1795, Kant laid out his vision for a world in which peace and justice are achieved through international cooperation and respect for human rights. He argued that lasting peace could only be secured if nations agreed to adhere to certain rational principles, including the establishment of republican governments, the formation of a federation of free states, and the recognition of the rights of individuals, both within their own countries and in the broader international community. Kant's vision of perpetual peace was based on the idea that just as individuals are bound by moral laws, so too are nations bound by principles of justice and fairness in their relations with one another. Kant's vision of cosmopolitan law The idea that there should be legal principles that govern the relationships between nations and individuals on a global scale was groundbreaking for its time. He believed that just as there are moral laws that apply to individuals, there should be laws that regulate the behavior of nations in their interactions with one another and with individuals. These laws, Kant argued, should be based on universal moral principles that protect the rights and dignity of all human beings, regardless of their nationality or citizenship. This idea has had a profound influence on the development of international law and the establishment of institutions like the United Nations, which seeks to promote peace, security, and human rights on a global scale. Kant's ideas about cosmopolitanism are also closely tied to his belief in the autonomy of individuals. He argued that individuals are morally autonomous agents, capable of reasoning for themselves and determining their own actions. For Kant, this autonomy extends beyond the boundaries of nation-states. He believed that individuals have certain moral rights that cannot be overridden by national governments or political authorities. This emphasis on individual autonomy has influenced modern discussions about global human rights, particularly in debates about the rights of refugees, migrants, and stateless persons. Kant's belief in the universality of moral laws has inspired efforts to ensure that all individuals, regardless of their legal status or geographic location, are treated with dignity and respect. Kant's ideas about cosmopolitanism have also been influential in discussions about global justice and the responsibilities that wealthy nations have toward poorer, less developed countries. Kant believed that nations, like individuals, are part of a global moral community and that they have certain duties toward one another. He argued that wealthier nations have a responsibility to assist those in need, not out of charity, but as a matter of justice. This idea has influenced modern debates about global inequality, foreign aid, and the responsibility of wealthy nations to address issues like poverty, hunger, and disease in the developing world. Kant's belief in the moral obligation to assist others has been a key influence on the development of international humanitarian efforts and the promotion of global solidarity. In Kant's view, cosmopolitanism also requires a commitment to peaceful coexistence and mutual respect among nations. He believed that nations must recognize each other's sovereignty and autonomy, but that this recognition must be balanced with the need to uphold universal moral principles. For Kant, peace is not simply the absence of war, but the establishment of a global order based on justice, fairness, and respect for human rights. This idea of peace as a moral obligation has influenced modern discussions about peace building, conflict resolution, and the role of international organizations in promoting stability and justice in a globalized world. Kant's vision of cosmopolitan citizenship challenges the traditional notion of citizenship as being tied to a particular nation-state. Instead, he argued that individuals are first and foremost members of a global moral community and that their moral obligations extend to all human beings regardless of national borders. This idea has inspired contemporary discussions about the concept of global citizenship, which emphasizes the importance of recognizing our shared humanity and taking responsibility for the well-being of others, both within and beyond our national communities. In the modern world, Kant's ideas about cosmopolitanism continue to resonate in debates about global governance, international justice, and human rights. His belief in the universality of moral principles has shaped the development of international human rights law and the establishment of global institutions aimed at promoting peace and justice. Kant's vision of a world where individuals are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their nationality, remains a powerful and enduring ideal in the pursuit of global justice and human solidarity. Kant's ideas about cosmopolitanism and global citizenship have had a profound impact on the development of modern political thought and international relations. His belief in the universal rights and dignity of all individuals, his emphasis on global justice and peace, and his call for nations to recognize their moral obligations toward one another continued to influence contemporary discussions about human rights, global governance, and the responsibilities of nations in an increasingly interconnected world. Kant's vision of a global moral community, where individuals and nations alike are bound by universal principles of justice, remains a guiding force in efforts to create a more just and equitable world. Immanuel Kant's ideas on the ethics of war and peace have had a significant influence on modern discussions about just war theory, international relations, and the moral principles that should guide decisions about war and conflict. Kant's approach to the ethics of war is grounded in his broader moral philosophy, particularly his emphasis on universal moral laws, human dignity, and the pursuit of peace through rational cooperation. His vision of a world where war is replaced by perpetual peace has inspired generations of thinkers and has shaped contemporary debates about the conditions under which war can be justified and how peace can be achieved. Kant's most influential work on the ethics of war is his essay Perpetual Peace, a philosophical sketch, 1795. In this work, Kant laid out a set of principles designed to prevent war and establish lasting peace between nations. Kant believed that war was a moral failure, a breakdown of reason and justice, and that nations, like individuals, are bound by universal moral laws that prohibit the use of violence except in very limited circumstances. Kant's vision of perpetual peace was based on the idea that reason and moral principles could guide nations toward peaceful coexistence, and that a world without war was not only desirable but also achievable. One of Kant's central ideas in perpetual peace is the notion that nations must adopt republican forms of government in order to prevent war. He argued that republics, in which the rule of law and the will of the people govern political decisions, are less likely to go to war than monarchies or autocratic regimes, where decisions about war are often made by a small group of elites. In a republic, Kant believed, citizens who bear the costs of war are unlikely to support conflicts that do not serve the common good. This idea has influenced modern discussions about democratic peace theory, which argues that democracies are less likely to go to war with one another because their leaders are accountable to the people, who are generally more interested in peace than in conflict. Kant also emphasized the importance of creating a federation of free states, a system of international cooperation designed to promote peace and prevent war. He believed that nations must agree to follow a set of international laws based on rational principles of justice and fairness. These laws would regulate the behavior of states and ensure that disputes are resolved through diplomacy and negotiation rather than through violence. Kant's vision of a federation of free states has influenced the development of international organizations such as the United Nations, which seeks to promote peace and security through cooperation and respect for international law. Kant's ideas about just war also address the conditions under which war might be morally justified. While Kant was generally opposed to war, he recognized that there are situations in which the use of force may be necessary, particularly in cases of self-defense or to protect the rights of individuals who are being oppressed. However, Kant insisted that any war must be fought in accordance with moral principles, and that the use of violence must be proportionate, justified, and aimed at restoring peace. This emphasis on the moral justification for war has influenced modern discussions about just war theory, which seeks to define the conditions under which war can be morally permissible and the rules that should govern the conduct of warfare. One of the most important aspects of Kant's approach to war is his belief that peace is not merely the absence of conflict but a moral obligation. He argued that nations have a duty to seek peace, not only for their own benefit but also for the good of humanity as a whole. This idea of peace as a moral duty has shaped contemporary debates about peace building, conflict resolution, and the role of international institutions in promoting peace and stability. Kant's insistence that nations must act according to universal moral principles continues to resonate in modern discussions about the ethics of war and peace. Kant's ideas about perpetual peace are also closely tied to his concept of cosmopolitanism, the belief that all human beings belong to a single global moral community and that our ethical obligations extend beyond national borders. In Perpetual Peace, Kant argued that nations must respect the rights of individuals, not only within their own borders but also in their interactions with other states. He believed that a cosmopolitan order, based on the principles of universal human rights and mutual respect, was essential for achieving lasting peace. This vision of a global moral community has influenced modern discussions about international law, human rights, and the responsibilities that nations have toward one another. Kant's vision of perpetual peace was both idealistic and pragmatic. While he believed that peace was a moral imperative, he also recognized that achieving lasting peace would require practical steps, such as the establishment of republican governments, the creation of international institutions, and the development of international law. Kant's pragmatic approach to peace has influenced modern efforts to build a more peaceful world, particularly through the promotion of democracy, human rights, and international cooperation. In modern times, Kant's ideas about just war and perpetual peace continue to shape discussions about the ethics of war and peace. His emphasis on the need for rational principles to guide international relations has influenced the development of international humanitarian law, which seeks to protect the rights of individuals during times of war and to limit the use of violence. Kant's belief that nations are bound by the same moral laws as individuals has also inspired efforts to hold states accountable for violations of human rights and international law. Kant's legacy in the ethics of war is particularly relevant in today's world, where conflicts often involve complex questions about human rights, sovereignty, and international justice. His insistence that war must be guided by moral principles and that nations have a duty to seek peace continues to resonate in debates about military intervention, the responsibility to protect, and the role of international institutions in promoting global stability. Kant's philosophy has had a profound impact on the ethics of war and the pursuit of perpetual peace. His ideas about just war, international law, and the moral duty to seek peace continue to influence contemporary discussions about war, conflict, and the responsibilities that nations have toward one another. Kant's vision of a world where nations are guided by universal moral principles and where peace is achieved through rational cooperation remains a powerful and enduring ideal in the pursuit of a more peaceful and just world. Immanuel Kant's concept of moral autonomy and his theory of the categorical imperative remain some of the most influential ideas in modern moral philosophy. Kant's emphasis on duty, autonomy, and the importance of acting according to universal moral principles laid the foundation for a system of ethics that has shaped not only philosophical discourse but also real-world discussions about justice, responsibility, and human rights. In this section, we will explore how Kant's idea of moral duty and the categorical imperative operate in practice, and how they continue to influence contemporary moral theory and ethical decision-making. At the core of Kant's moral philosophy is the idea that human beings are rational agents, capable of acting according to reason, rather than being driven solely by desires, emotions, or external pressures. For Kant, what makes human beings morally autonomous is their ability to govern themselves according to rational moral laws that they recognize as binding. This ability to act according to principles that one has chosen for oneself, rather than following external commands or instincts, is what Kant means by moral autonomy. It is through this capacity for self-governance that individuals become truly free and morally responsible for their actions. Kant's concept of moral duty flows from this idea of autonomy. In Kant's view, morality is not about following rules imposed by others, nor is it about seeking pleasure or avoiding pain. Instead, Morality is about acting in accordance with duty, the obligation to follow moral principles that we recognize as universal and necessary. For Kant, the right action is one that is motivated by duty, not by self-interest, fear, or desire for reward. This idea of duty as the guiding force behind moral action sets Kant's ethics apart from other moral theories, such as utilitarianism, which bases moral decisions on the consequences of actions rather than on the moral principles behind them. Kant's famous formulation of the categorical imperative is the cornerstone of his moral philosophy and provides a clear guide for how to determine one's moral duties. The categorical imperative is an unconditional command that applies to all rational beings, regardless of their individual desires or circumstances. Unlike hypothetical imperatives, which are conditional and apply only if one desires a particular outcome, e.g., if you want to be healthy, you should exercise, the categorical imperative holds universally and without exception. Kant formulated the categorical imperative in several ways, but the most well-known formulation is the principle of universalizability, which states, act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. This means that before taking any action, one must ask whether the principle behind that action could be consistently applied to everyone in similar circumstances. If the answer is yes, then the action is morally permissible. If the answer is no, then the action is morally wrong. For example, consider the act of lying. According to the categorical imperative, one must ask, could I will that everyone should lie whenever it benefits them? The answer, Kant argues, is no. If everyone lied, trust would be destroyed, and the very practice of lying would become meaningless because no one would believe what anyone else says. Therefore, lying cannot be justified as a universal law, and it is morally wrong. This idea of universalizability provides a rational method for evaluating the morality of actions, ensuring that they are not based on personal interests but on principles that can be applied consistently to all. Another important formulation of the categorical imperative is the principle of humanity, which states, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end, and never merely as a means. This principle emphasizes the inherent dignity of every individual and insists that people should never be used simply as tools to achieve someone else's goals. In practical terms, this means that we must respect the autonomy and moral worth of others in all of our interactions. Whether we are engaging in personal relationships, business transactions, or political decisions, we must always treat people as ends in themselves, worthy of respect and consideration, rather than as mere means to an end. Kant's categorical imperative has had a profound influence on human rights theory and the development of modern legal and political systems. The idea that individuals have inherent dignity and must be treated as ends in themselves has shaped the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights documents, which emphasize the importance of respecting the autonomy, freedom, and equality of all people. Kant's insistence that moral principles must be universal and impartial has also influenced contemporary discussions about justice and equality, particularly in debates about discrimination, social justice, and the protection of vulnerable populations. In everyday moral decision-making, Kant's ethics provides a framework for evaluating the moral worth of our actions. When faced with a difficult ethical dilemma, we can use the categorical imperative to assess whether the action we are considering is one that could be universalized and whether it respects the dignity of others. For example, in a business context, we might ask whether it is ethical to exploit cheap labor in another country to maximize profits. According to the principle of humanity, this action would be morally wrong because it treats the workers as mere means to an end, rather than as autonomous individuals with their own dignity and rights. Kant's emphasis on moral duty also has implications for moral responsibility. In his view, Individuals are morally responsible for their actions because they have the capacity to act according to reason. This means that we cannot excuse immoral behavior by claiming that we were simply following orders or acting out of necessity. Instead, we must take responsibility for our actions and ensure that they are consistent with moral principles. This idea of moral accountability has shaped modern discussions about criminal justice, leadership, and corporate responsibility, where individuals and organizations are expected to act ethically and to be held accountable for their decisions. Kant's theory of the categorical imperative also addresses the importance of consistency in moral decision-making. Kant believed that moral principles must be applied consistently in all situations, regardless of the specific details of the case. This means that we cannot make exceptions for ourselves or others based on personal preferences or special circumstances. If a moral principle is valid, it must apply to everyone equally. This emphasis on consistency has influenced modern discussions about impartiality in legal and political systems, where fairness and justice require that laws be applied equally to all individuals, without bias or favoritism. In conclusion, Kant's concept of moral autonomy and the categorical imperative continue to provide a powerful framework for understanding moral duty and ethical decision-making. His emphasis on universal moral principles, human dignity, and the importance of treating others as ends in themselves has had a lasting impact on modern philosophy, human rights, and real-world discussions about justice and responsibility. Kant's moral philosophy challenges us to act according to reason, to take responsibility for our actions, and to respect the autonomy and dignity of all individuals. Immanuel Kant's contributions to modern ethics, particularly his development of deontological ethics, have left a profound and enduring legacy in philosophical discourse. Kant's moral philosophy, with its focus on duty, autonomy, and universal moral principles, contrasts sharply with consequentialist theories like utilitarianism, which focus on the outcomes of actions. Kant's deontological approach has influenced contemporary debates about human rights, moral responsibility, and justice, and continues to serve as a framework for ethical decision-making in both personal and societal contexts. At the heart of Kant's deontological ethics is the idea that moral actions are defined not by their consequences but by the intentions and principles behind them. In Kant's view, the rightness or wrongness of an action is determined by whether it conforms to a universal moral law, not by the results it produces. This idea is central to Kant's formulation of the categorical imperative, which commands us to act only according to maxims that we can will to become universal laws. For Kant, an action is morally good if it is done out of duty, that is, if it is motivated by respect for the moral law, rather than by self-interest, emotion, or the pursuit of pleasure. This focus on duty and principle rather than consequences has made Kant's ethics a powerful alternative to utilitarianism, which evaluates actions based on their ability to produce the greatest amount of happiness or utility for the greatest number of people. Whereas utilitarianism is concerned with maximizing outcomes, Kantian deontology emphasizes the intrinsic moral worth of actions and the importance of following moral rules that respect the autonomy and dignity of individuals. Kant rejected the idea that the ends justify the means, arguing that even if an action produces positive outcomes, it cannot be morally justified if it violates universal moral principles or treats individuals as mere means to an end. One of the key aspects of Kant's legacy in modern ethics is his emphasis on the inherent dignity of individuals. According to Kant, every person possesses an intrinsic worth simply by virtue of being a rational agent, capable of reasoning and making moral decisions. This belief in the dignity of individuals is encapsulated in the second formulation of the categorical imperative, which commands us to treat humanity, whether in our own person or in the person of others, always as an end in itself and never merely as a means to an end. This principle has had a profound influence on human rights theory, shaping the idea that individuals must be treated with respect and that their rights must be protected, regardless of the consequences. Kant's emphasis on universal moral principles has also shaped modern discussions about justice and equality. In Kant's view, moral laws must be universal and apply equally to all individuals, regardless of their specific circumstances. This means that we cannot make exceptions for ourselves or others based on personal preferences, social status, or special circumstances. Kant's insistence on the impartiality of moral laws has influenced contemporary debates about discrimination, fairness, and social justice, particularly in discussions about how laws and policies should be applied to ensure that all individuals are treated with equal respect and dignity. One of the most significant areas where Kant's deontological ethics continues to have an impact is in the field of bioethics. Kant's emphasis on the autonomy and dignity of individuals has shaped contemporary debates about medical ethics, particularly in discussions about informed consent, patient rights, and the ethical treatment of vulnerable populations. Kantian ethics provides a framework for evaluating difficult moral dilemmas in healthcare, such as whether it is ethical to prioritize the needs of one patient over another, or how to balance the rights of individuals with the need to promote public health. In bioethics, Kant's insistence that individuals must always be treated as ends in themselves provides a powerful rationale for protecting the autonomy and rights of patients, even when doing so might lead to less efficient or less favorable outcomes. Kant's deontological approach has also had a significant influence on legal theory, particularly in discussions about criminal justice and punishment. Kant argued that individuals must be held morally responsible for their actions, and that justice requires that people face the consequences of their choices. However, Kant rejected the idea of punishment as a means of achieving deterrence or social utility. Instead, he believed that punishment must be proportionate to the crime and must be based on the principle of retributive justice, the idea that individuals deserve to be punished because they have violated the moral law, not because their punishment will produce beneficial outcomes for society. This focus on moral accountability and retributive justice has shaped modern discussions about criminal justice reform and the ethical treatment of offenders, particularly in debates about the fairness and proportionality of punishments. Kant's emphasis on autonomy and moral responsibility has also influenced contemporary debates about free will and determinism. Kant believed that individuals are morally responsible for their actions because they have the capacity to act according to reason. This idea of rational autonomy is central to Kant's deontological ethics and has shaped modern discussions about the nature of free will, moral agency, and the conditions under which individuals can be held accountable for their actions. In contemporary philosophy, Kant's ideas continue to inform debates about the relationship between free will and moral responsibility, particularly in discussions about the impact of social, psychological, and biological factors on human behavior. In addition to his influence on moral and legal theory, Kant's deontological ethics has also shaped discussions about political philosophy and human rights. Kant's belief that individuals possess inherent dignity and that moral laws must be universal and impartial has influenced the development of liberal democratic theory and the idea of universal human rights. Kant's insistence that moral principles must apply equally to all individuals, regardless of their nationality, race, or social status, has inspired efforts to promote global justice and protect the rights of vulnerable populations. His ideas about cosmopolitanism, the belief that all human beings belong to a single global moral community, continue to influence contemporary discussions about international law, global governance, and the responsibilities that nations have toward one another and toward humanity as a whole. In the field of environmental ethics, Kant's deontological approach has provided a framework for addressing moral questions about the treatment of animals and the environment. While Kant himself focused primarily on the rights and responsibilities of human beings, modern environmental philosophers have adapted his ideas to argue that we have moral duties toward the natural world and that our actions must respect the intrinsic value of non-human life. Kant's emphasis on the universalizability of moral laws has been used to argue that environmental destruction cannot be morally justified, as it undermines the well-being of future generations and violates our duty to protect the planet for those who will come after us. Kant's deontological ethics has had a profound and lasting impact on modern moral philosophy. His emphasis on moral duty, universal moral principles, and the dignity of individuals continues to shape contemporary discussions about justice, human rights, and ethical decision-making. Kant's legacy in modern ethics challenges us to act according to reason and duty, to respect the autonomy and dignity of all individuals, and to uphold moral principles that apply equally and impartially to all. In a world increasingly focused on outcomes and efficiency, Kant's deontological approach reminds us of the importance of moral principles and the intrinsic value of acting in accordance with duty. Immanuel Kant's theory of knowledge, or epistemology, represents a major turning point in the history of philosophy. Kant sought to address the debates between empiricism and rationalism, the two dominant schools of thought in his time, and in doing so, he developed a theory that reshaped the way we understand how human beings acquire knowledge and perceive reality. His work, especially in the critique of pure reason, revolutionized the way philosophers think about the relationship between the mind and the external world, and it continues to influence contemporary discussions in cognitive science, philosophy of mind, and metaphysics. At the heart of Kant's epistemology is his distinction between the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. The phenomenal world is the world as we experience it, reality as it appears to us through the lens of our senses and mental faculties. The noumenal world, on the other hand, is the world as it exists in itself, independent of our perceptions. According to Kant, while we can have knowledge of the phenomenal world, we can never fully access or understand the noumenal world because all of our experiences are mediated by the structures of the mind. Kant's central claim is that the human mind plays an active role in shaping our experience of the world. In contrast to the empiricist view, which holds that all knowledge comes from sensory experience, and the rationalist view, which argues that knowledge can be derived from pure reason, Kant proposed a synthesized approach. He argued that while knowledge begins with experience, the mind imposes certain a priori structures, such as space, time, and causality, on that experience. These structures are not derived from the external world. Instead, they are inherent features of the mind that allow us to make sense of sensory data. This idea is the foundation of Kant's theory of transcendental idealism. He argued that space and time are not properties of objects themselves, but are the forms in which we perceive objects. In other words, space and time are not features of the noumenal world, they are the framework through which the human mind organizes sensory data into coherent experiences. This insight was groundbreaking because it suggested that reality, as we experience it, is shaped by the conditions of human cognition. Our understanding of the world is always filtered through the lens of these a priori categories, meaning that our knowledge is limited to the phenomenal realm, the world as it appears to us. Kant's famous statement, "Thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind," captures the essence of his theory of knowledge. For Kant, intuitions refer to the raw data of sensory experience, while concepts refer to the mental categories we use to organize and interpret that data. Neither can function without the other. Intuitions without concepts would be mere sensory chaos, while concepts without intuitions would be abstract ideas with no connection to the real world. Knowledge, according to Kant, arises from the interaction between these two elements, sensory input from the external world and the mental categories that shape and organize that input. One of the most important aspects of Kant's theory of knowledge is his argument that certain concepts, such as causality and necessity, are not derived from experience but are a priori. They exist in the mind prior to any experience. For example, when we observe one event following another, we automatically assume a cause and effect relationship, even though we have no direct sensory experience of causality itself. According to Kant, this is because causality is an a priori category that the mind uses to organize sensory data. In this way, Kant sought to explain how we can have objective knowledge of the world, even though our understanding of the world is always shaped by the structures of the mind. Kant's theory of knowledge also addresses the limits of human reason. While he believed that reason is a powerful tool for understanding the world, he argued that there are certain ultimate questions, such as the existence of God, the nature of the soul, and the origin of the universe, that lie beyond the scope of human knowledge. Kant referred to these questions as belonging to the noumenal realm, the world as it exists independently of human experience. Because we can never directly perceive or experience the noumenal world, Kant argued that we can never have definitive answers to these metaphysical questions. This led him to conclude that while it is rational to believe in concepts like God and freedom, such beliefs cannot be proven or disproven through empirical evidence or pure reason. This idea, the recognition of the limits of reason, was a central theme in Kant's philosophy. He sought to reconcile the power of human reason with the humility required by its limitations. Kant's famous assertion, "I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith," reflects this approach. He believed that by acknowledging the limits of reason, we open the door to moral and religious belief, which, while not grounded in empirical knowledge, can still be justified through practical reason. Kant's theory of knowledge also had a profound impact on the development of modern science. His distinction between the phenomenal and noumenal worlds influenced later thinkers, such as Albert Einstein, whose theory of relativity challenged traditional notions of space and time. Kant's idea that space and time are not inherent features of the external world but are instead the forms through which we perceive the world anticipates some of the key insights of modern physics, particularly in relation to the subjective nature of human perception and the limitations of objective knowledge. In contemporary discussions, Kant's epistemology continues to resonate in fields such as cognitive science and philosophy of mind. His insights into the active role of the mind in shaping experience have influenced theories about how the brain processes sensory information and constructs our perception of reality. Constructivist theories of perception, which argue that the brain creates a model of the world based on the information it receives, are rooted in Kant's idea that human cognition imposes order on the chaos of sensory data. Kant's theory of knowledge, his transcendental idealism, remains one of the most influential and innovative contributions to modern philosophy. His recognition of the limits of human reason and his insight into the ways the mind shapes our experience of reality continue to inspire debates in philosophy, science, and cognitive theory. Kant's epistemology challenges us to reflect on the nature of knowledge, the relationship between perception and reality, and the boundaries of human understanding. Kant's theory of the self also addresses the question of personal identity over time. If the self is constantly involved in the synthesis of experiences, how can we account for the continuity of the self across different moments in time? Kant's answer lies in the idea of self-consciousness, or the awareness that the self has of its own existence over time. According to Kant, the transcendental ego is the unifying subject that links all of our experiences together, providing the foundation for our sense of personal identity. Even though the content of our experiences changes over time, the subject of those experiences, the transcendental ego, remains the same, allowing us to recognize ourselves as the same person across different moments in our lives. Kant's views on the self have had a profound influence on later philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and subjectivity. In particular, his emphasis on the active role of the mind in shaping experience has influenced theories of phenomenology, existentialism, and cognitive science. Phenomenologists like Husserl built on Kant's insights to explore the nature of intentionality, the idea that consciousness is always directed towards something, and the role of the self in the constitution of meaning. Existentialists like Sartre further developed Kant's notion of the transcendental self, arguing that human beings are not defined by any fixed essence but are constantly involved in the project of becoming through their choices and actions. In the realm of cognitive science, Kant's insights into the structure of consciousness continue to shape contemporary discussions about the nature of the mind and its relationship to the brain. Modern theories of constructivism and cognitive psychology echo Kant's idea that the mind plays an active role in organizing sensory data rather than passively receiving it. This idea has important implications for understanding how the brain processes information and how our sense of self is constructed through interactions between sensory input, memory, and cognition. Immanuel Kant's philosophy offers a groundbreaking exploration of the self and consciousness, providing a framework that has influenced subsequent thinkers in both philosophy and psychology. His work on the nature of the self is intricately connected to his theory of knowledge and transcendental idealism, particularly his distinction between the empirical self, the self we experience, and the transcendental ego, the aspect of the self that underlies and makes experience possible. Kant's views on the self continue to shape modern debates on personal identity, subjectivity, and the nature of consciousness. In Kant's philosophy, the self is not simply an object that can be observed and studied in the same way as external phenomena. Instead, the self is the subject of experience, the thinking and perceiving entity that structures all knowledge and perception. Kant's exploration of the self begins with his argument that the mind plays an active role in shaping our experience of the world. For Kant, the mind is not a passive receiver of sensory data, rather, it actively organizes and interprets the data using a priori categories such as space, time, and causality. The self, then, is not just something we observe from the outside, but is intimately involved in the construction of reality as we experience it. Kant distinguishes between the empirical self and the transcendental ego. The empirical self refers to the self as it appears to us through experience, our thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories. This is the self we are most familiar with, the one we can reflect upon and describe in terms of its characteristics and attributes. However, Kant argues that this empirical self is not the true self in the deepest sense. Instead, it is merely the phenomenal self, the self as it appears within the world of experience. The transcendental ego, on the other hand, is the self that exists beyond experience and makes experience possible in the first place. It is the unifying subject that organizes all of our thoughts and perceptions into a coherent whole. According to Kant, the transcendental ego is not something that can be directly known or observed because it does not exist in the world of phenomena. Instead, it is a necessary precondition for the existence of experience itself. The transcendental ego is the I that thinks, the subject that is always present but never directly perceived, enabling the synthesis of different sensory inputs into a unified experience of the world. Kant's distinction between the empirical self and the transcendental ego highlights the active role that the self plays in the construction of knowledge. While the empirical self is shaped by external experiences, the transcendental ego is responsible for organizing those experiences into a unified and coherent consciousness. This idea has had a profound influence on later philosophical and psychological theories of the self, particularly in the works of thinkers such as Edmund Husserl and Jean-Paul Sartre, who expanded on Kant's exploration of the subjective nature of human consciousness. One of the key implications of Kant's notion of the transcendental self is that the self is not a static entity. Instead, It is constantly involved in the process of synthesis, bringing together sensory data, memories, and thoughts to create a continuous and unified stream of consciousness. This emphasis on the dynamic nature of the self challenges traditional notions of the self as a fixed or permanent entity and suggests that personal identity is something that is constantly being constructed and reconstructed through experience. Kant's theory of the self also addresses the question of personal identity over time. If the self is constantly involved in the synthesis of experiences, how can we account for the continuity of the self across different moments in time? Kant's answer lies in the idea of self-consciousness, or the awareness that the self has of its own existence over time. According to Kant, the transcendental ego is the unifying subject that links all of our experiences together, providing the foundation for our sense of personal identity. Even though the content of our experiences changes over time, the subject of those experiences, the transcendental ego, remains the same, allowing us to recognize ourselves as the same person across different moments in our lives. Kant's views on the self have had a profound influence on later philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and subjectivity. In particular, his emphasis on the active role of the mind in shaping experience has influenced theories of phenomenology, existentialism, and cognitive science. Phenomenologists like Husserl built on Kant's insights to explore the nature of intentionality, the idea that consciousness is always directed towards something, and the role of the self in the constitution of meaning. Existentialists like Sartre further developed Kant's notion of the transcendental self, arguing that human beings are not defined by any fixed essence but are constantly involved in the project of becoming through their choices and actions. In the realm of cognitive science, Kant's insights into the structure of consciousness continue to shape contemporary discussions about the nature of the mind and its relationship to the brain. Modern theories of constructivism and cognitive psychology echo Kant's idea that the mind plays an active role in organizing sensory data rather than passively receiving it. This idea has important implications for understanding how the brain processes information and how our sense of self is constructed through interactions between sensory input, memory, and cognition. Kant's exploration of the self also raises important questions about the relationship between freedom and self-determination. For Kant, the transcendental self is the source of moral autonomy, the ability to act according to rational moral laws that we give to ourselves. This idea is central to Kant's moral philosophy, which emphasizes the importance of acting in accordance with duty rather than being driven by external forces or desires. The autonomy of the self, for Kant, is what allows us to be free and morally responsible for our actions. This connection between the self and freedom has influenced modern discussions about free will, moral agency, and the conditions necessary for ethical decision-making. Kant's notion of the self and his distinction between the empirical self and the transcendental ego have had a lasting impact on philosophical and psychological theories of consciousness, identity, and subjectivity. His exploration of the active role of the self in shaping experience and his emphasis on the continuity of self-consciousness over time continue to influence contemporary discussions in cognitive science, phenomenology, and existentialism. Kant's legacy in this area challenges us to think deeply about the nature of the self, the limits of self-knowledge, and the dynamic processes that shape our personal identity. Immanuel Kant's ideas about the active role of the mind in shaping human experience have had a profound influence on the development of modern psychology. Although Kant himself was not a psychologist, his philosophical insights into how the mind organizes and interprets sensory information laid the groundwork for many key concepts in cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, and neuroscience. Kant's work helped to shift the focus from understanding the mind as a passive receiver of information to viewing it as an active agent in constructing our perception of reality. This shift has shaped modern approaches to understanding perception, memory, consciousness, and the nature of human cognition. At the core of Kant's philosophy is the idea that the mind is not simply a blank slate that passively receives information from the external world. Instead, Kant argued that the mind plays an active role in shaping and organizing our experiences. This idea is central to his theory of transcendental idealism, which posits that the mind imposes certain a priori categories, such as space, time, and causality, on sensory data in order to make sense of it. These categories are not derived from experience, but are inherent features of the mind that allow us to structure our perceptions and create a coherent understanding of the world. Kant's emphasis on the active nature of the mind has had a lasting impact on modern psychology, particularly in the field of cognitive science. In contrast to earlier theories that viewed the mind as a passive receptor, cognitive psychology is rooted in the idea that the brain actively processes and organizes information. This approach, which focuses on understanding the mental processes involved in perception, memory, problem-solving, and decision-making, is deeply influenced by Kant's insights into the nature of human cognition. Modern psychologists build on Kant's idea that the mind constructs reality by organizing sensory data, leading to theories that explore how we perceive the world and how our cognitive frameworks influence our experiences. Kant's ideas about the constructive nature of human perception have been especially influential in the development of constructivist theories of perception and learning. These theories argue that individuals do not passively absorb information from their environment, rather, they actively construct their understanding of the world based on their interactions with it. This approach is reflected in the work of Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist who developed a theory of cognitive development that emphasizes how children construct their knowledge of the world through a series of stages. Piaget's theory, which focuses on the development of mental structures called schemas, echoes Kant's idea that the mind plays an active role in organizing sensory input and creating a meaningful experience of the world. One of Kant's most important contributions to modern psychology is his recognition of the limits of human cognition. Kant believed that while the mind plays an active role in shaping experience, it is also limited by the a priori categories it uses to interpret the world. These categories, such as space, time, and causality, shape our experience of the phenomenal world, but they also place limits on what we can know about the noumenal world, the world as it exists independently of our perceptions. This recognition of the limitations of human knowledge has influenced modern discussions about the boundaries of consciousness and the nature of subjective experience. In fields such as cognitive psychology and neuroscience, researchers continue to explore the ways in which the brain's cognitive frameworks both enable and limit our understanding of reality. Kant's distinction between the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it, and the noumenal world, the world as it exists independently of our perceptions, has also had a significant impact on theories of consciousness. Kant's argument that we can never fully know the noumenal world because all of our experiences are mediated by the structures of the mind has shaped modern discussions about the nature of subjective experience. In particular, Kant's insights have influenced phenomenology, a philosophical movement that explores how consciousness shapes our experience of the world. Edmund Husserl, the founder of phenomenology, built on Kant's ideas by arguing that all of our experiences are shaped by intentionality, the mind's ability to direct itself toward objects in the world, and that consciousness is always structured by the ways in which we perceive and interpret our surroundings. In the realm of developmental psychology, Kant's ideas have helped to shape modern approaches to understanding the development of cognition and moral reasoning. Kant's emphasis on the role of reason and rationality in shaping moral decisions influenced psychologists such as Lawrence Kohlberg, who developed a theory of moral development that describes how individuals progress through different stages of moral reasoning. Kohlberg's work, which builds on Kant's ideas about the categorical imperative and the importance of universal moral principles, argues that moral reasoning evolves from a focus on self-interest to an understanding of universal ethical principles. In this sense, Kant's influence extends beyond theories of perception and cognition to encompass the development of moral and ethical thought. Kant's recognition of the autonomy of the mind has also had a profound impact on modern discussions about free will and agency. Kant believed that human beings are morally autonomous agents, capable of acting according to rational moral laws that they give to themselves. This idea of moral autonomy has influenced contemporary debates about the relationship between consciousness, free will, and determinism. In psychology, researchers explore how the brain's cognitive processes enable individuals to make decisions and exercise control over their actions, while philosophers continue to debate the extent to which human beings are truly free to make moral choices. Kant's insistence on the autonomy of the mind has inspired efforts to understand how rationality and free will operate in both individual and social contexts. Another area where Kant's ideas have influenced modern psychology is in the study of self-consciousness and personal identity. Kant's distinction between the empirical self, the self we experience through our perceptions, and the transcendental self, the self that underlies all of our experiences and makes them possible, has shaped contemporary discussions about the nature of subjectivity and the continuity of the self over time. In modern psychology, researchers explore how individuals develop a sense of personal identity, how memory and experience shape our understanding of the self, and how self-consciousness emerges as part of the brain's cognitive processes. Kant's insights into the nature of the self continue to influence efforts to understand the complex relationship between consciousness, memory, and identity. Kant's ideas have also contributed to the development of modern approaches to mental health and the treatment of psychological disorders. His emphasis on the autonomy of the mind and the importance of acting according to rational principles has influenced therapeutic approaches that emphasize self-determination and the development of rational strategies for coping with emotional and psychological challenges. In fields such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, therapists work with patients to help them recognize and challenge irrational beliefs and to develop more constructive ways of thinking and acting. Kant's emphasis on the importance of reason and rationality continues to shape modern approaches to mental health and well-being. In conclusion, Immanuel Kant's ideas about the active role of the mind in shaping human experience have had a profound and lasting impact on modern psychology. His insights into how the mind organizes and interprets sensory data have influenced fields ranging from cognitive psychology to developmental psychology and neuroscience. Kant's recognition of the limits of human cognition and his emphasis on the autonomy of the mind continue to shape contemporary discussions about consciousness, free will, and the nature of the self. Kant's legacy in modern psychology challenges us to think deeply about how the mind constructs our experience of the world and how we can better understand the complexities of human cognition. Immanuel Kant's contributions to aesthetics have had a profound influence on how we think about art, beauty, and the experience of the sublime. In his work The Critique of Judgment, 1790, Kant developed a detailed theory of aesthetic experience, exploring how we judge beauty and how art and nature affect our emotions. His ideas on the sublime and the beautiful continue to shape discussions about the nature of aesthetic judgment, the relationship between art and morality, and the emotional power of nature and artistic expression. Kant's exploration of aesthetics begins with the distinction between the beautiful and the sublime, two different types of aesthetic experience that elicit distinct emotional responses. According to Kant, beauty is characterized by harmony and pleasure, while the sublime is associated with feelings of awe and magnitude that can be overwhelming or even terrifying. These two experiences highlight different aspects of our relationship with the world. Beauty is connected to our sense of order, proportion, and harmony, whereas the sublime evokes a sense of vastness, power, and limitlessness that challenges our ability to fully comprehend it. The beautiful. For Kant, the experience of beauty arises from the free play of our cognitive faculties, imagination and understanding as we encounter an object that evokes a sense of harmony and pleasure. When we judge something as beautiful, we do so without any practical or moral interest in the object. This is what Kant calls disinterested pleasure, a type of pleasure that is experienced simply for its own sake, without any desire to possess or use the object. For example, when we admire a flower, we find pleasure in its beauty, not because we want to pick it or use it for some purpose, but because of the way it harmoniously engages our senses and mind. Kant's notion of beauty is closely tied to the idea of purposiveness without purpose. This means that when we find something beautiful, we perceive it as if it has a purpose or goal, but without actually assigning it any specific function or use. A beautiful painting, for example, seems to be perfectly composed and harmonious, as if it were designed to evoke a particular response, but we do not attribute any practical purpose to it. This experience of beauty, for Kant, reflects the way our minds find order and meaning in the world, even when there is no specific purpose or function involved. In Kant's aesthetic theory, beauty is also linked to universality. While our judgments of beauty are based on personal experience, Kant argues that when we find something beautiful, we assume that others should also find it beautiful. This is because the experience of beauty involves a universal communicability, the idea that beauty reflects a shared human capacity to experience pleasure and harmony in the world. Even though aesthetic judgments are subjective, Kant believed that they carry a sense of universality because they are based on the common structure of human cognition. The sublime. While beauty is associated with harmony and pleasure, the experience of the sublime is quite different. The sublime occurs when we encounter something so vast, powerful, or overwhelming that it challenges our ability to fully comprehend it. Examples of the sublime include majestic mountains, stormy seas, or the immensity of the night sky. When faced with such phenomena, we may feel a sense of awe or even terror, but this experience also evokes a kind of exhilaration and uplift as we recognize the limitlessness of nature and our own capacity for reason. Kant distinguishes between two types of the sublime, the mathematical sublime and the dynamical sublime. The mathematical sublime occurs when we are confronted with objects or phenomena that are so vast that they defy our ability to measure or comprehend them. For example, the infinite expanse of the night sky or the immensity of the ocean can evoke the mathematical sublime as we recognize the limits of our ability to grasp the sheer scale of these phenomena. However, Kant argues that even though our senses may be overwhelmed, our reason allows us to transcend these limits by contemplating infinity and the boundless nature of the universe. The dynamical sublime, on the other hand, is experienced when we encounter something that has overwhelming power, such as a violent storm or a towering waterfall. In these moments, we may feel physically small and vulnerable, but we also recognize that we are not actually threatened because we can stand back and observe the power of nature from a safe distance. This awareness of our safety allows us to appreciate the sublime power of nature without being consumed by fear. In experiencing the dynamical sublime, we become aware of our ability to rise above the physical world through the power of reason and moral autonomy. For Kant, the sublime is deeply connected to the idea of freedom and moral self-governance. When we encounter the sublime, we are reminded of the limitations of our physical bodies and senses, but we also recognize the supremacy of reason and our capacity to think beyond the material world. In this way, the experience of the sublime serves as a reminder of our freedom as rational beings, capable of rising above nature's physical constraints through the use of reason and moral reflection. Aesthetic judgment and morality. Kant's theory of aesthetics is not just about art and nature, it is also closely connected to his broader philosophical system, particularly his ideas about morality and freedom. Kant believed that the experience of beauty and the sublime can serve as a kind of preparation for moral reflection. The disinterested pleasure we experience in beauty, for example, mirrors the disinterestedness of moral action, acting according to moral duty without regard for personal gain. Similarly, the experience of the sublime, which challenges our physical limitations, reminds us of the power of moral law and the freedom that comes from acting according to rational principles rather than being driven by fear or desire. In this way, Kant's aesthetics is deeply connected to his moral philosophy. The appreciation of beauty and the sublime is not just about emotional responses to art or nature, it is also about cultivating the moral faculties that allow us to act freely and ethically. For Kant, the capacity to appreciate beauty and the sublime reflects our ability to transcend mere sensory experience and engage with the world in a rational and moral way. Kant's influence on modern aesthetics. Kant's ideas about the sublime and the beautiful have had a profound influence on later aesthetic theory and art criticism. His distinction between the beautiful and the sublime influenced Romanticism, an artistic movement that celebrated the power of nature and the intensity of human emotions. Romantic poets such as William Wordsworth and Percy Bysshe Shelley were deeply influenced by Kant's ideas, particularly his exploration of the sublime and the way it evokes feelings of awe and transcendence. Kant's aesthetic theory also laid the groundwork for modern discussions about the nature of art and artistic expression. His emphasis on disinterested pleasure and the universality of aesthetic judgment continues to shape contemporary debates about the value of art, the relationship between aesthetics and ethics, and the role of art in society. Modern philosophers, including Theodor Adorno and Arthur Danto, have built on Kant's insights to explore how art challenges our perceptions of reality and engages our moral and cognitive faculties. In conclusion, Kant's exploration of aesthetics, particularly his ideas about the sublime and the beautiful, has had a lasting impact on the philosophy of art and the way we think about aesthetic experience. His work continues to influence contemporary discussions about the emotional power of art, the relationship between aesthetic judgment and moral reflection, and the role of beauty and the sublime in shaping our understanding of the world. Kant's aesthetic theory challenges us to think deeply about how we experience art and nature, and how these experiences can inspire both pleasure and moral reflection. Immanuel Kant's exploration of aesthetic judgment in the Critique of Judgment is not limited to defining the beautiful and the sublime, it also addresses deeper questions about the relationship between art, nature, and morality. For Kant, aesthetic experiences are not just about personal pleasure or emotional reactions, they play a crucial role in shaping our moral character and our understanding of the world. His theories on the purpose of beauty and the moral implications of aesthetic experience continue to resonate in modern discussions about the role of art in society, the value of nature, and the ways in which aesthetic judgment can influence moral reflection. Kant's aesthetic philosophy is rooted in the idea that beauty and art have an important moral function. Unlike some philosophers who viewed art as mere imitation or a source of pleasure, Kant believed that aesthetic experiences are deeply connected to our rational capacities and our ability to reflect on moral principles. The appreciation of beauty, both in art and in nature, engages the imagination and the understanding, prompting us to think beyond ourselves and our immediate desires. In this way, aesthetic experiences serve as a kind of moral education, encouraging us to cultivate our moral faculties and develop a deeper sense of human dignity and ethical responsibility. Purpose and purposiveness without purpose. One of Kant's most significant contributions to aesthetic theory is his concept of purposiveness without purpose. This idea refers to the way in which we perceive objects as if they were designed with a specific purpose, even when they are not. In aesthetic judgment, we find pleasure in the form of an object without attributing any practical use or function to it. For example, when we look at a painting or a natural landscape, we experience it as if it were arranged in a harmonious and meaningful way, even though it does not serve any concrete purpose in our lives. According to Kant, this sense of purposiveness is crucial to our experience of beauty. It reflects the way our cognitive faculties, imagination, and understanding interact to create a sense of harmony and order in our perception of the world. This interaction between the faculties creates a feeling of pleasure, which is disinterested and free from any desire to possess or use the object. The idea of purposiveness without purpose allows us to appreciate beauty in a purely aesthetic sense, without the need for practical or moral considerations. However, Kant also suggests that this experience of aesthetic purposiveness has a deeper moral significance. The ability to find order and meaning in the world, even when it has no direct practical use, reflects our capacity to engage with the world in a rational and reflective way. In this sense, the experience of beauty is closely linked to our moral faculties. It prepares us to think about the world in terms of universal principles and encourages us to consider our place in the larger scheme of things. Beauty in nature and art. Kant's distinction between beauty in nature and beauty in art is central to his aesthetic theory. For Kant, natural beauty is particularly significant because it seems to reflect a kind of natural purposiveness, even though nature itself has no conscious intention or goal. When we observe a beautiful flower, a sunset, or a landscape, we experience a sense of harmony and order that seems to suggest a deeper meaning or design. This experience, Kant argues, inspires a kind of moral reflection. We are reminded of our place in nature and the limits of our knowledge about the natural world. Kant also believed that natural beauty has the power to evoke feelings of humility and gratitude. In his view, the experience of natural beauty can lead us to reflect on the interconnectedness of all living things and the fragility of the natural world. This reflection, in turn, can inspire a sense of moral duty to protect and preserve nature for future generations. For Kant, the appreciation of beauty in nature is not just about personal pleasure, it is also about recognizing the value of the natural world and our moral responsibilities as stewards of the environment. In contrast, Kant viewed artistic beauty as a product of human creativity and imagination. Unlike natural beauty, which is found in the world around us, artistic beauty is the result of intentional human effort. Artists create works that reflect a sense of harmony, balance, and proportion, using their imagination to produce forms that engage the viewer's senses and intellect. For Kant, the value of art lies not in its ability to represent the world, but in its ability to evoke a sense of purposiveness without purpose, to engage the viewer's aesthetic faculties and inspire reflective judgment. Kant's theory of art emphasizes the importance of the imagination in both the creation and appreciation of art. For Kant, the imagination plays a key role in shaping our experience of beauty, allowing us to see the world in new and creative ways. Artists, through their imaginative use of form, color, and composition, can create works that transcend the limitations of everyday experience and evoke a sense of aesthetic pleasure that is both universal and disinterested. Aesthetic judgment and moral reflection. Kant believed that aesthetic judgment has a close relationship with moral judgment. The experience of beauty, whether in nature or art, encourages us to think beyond our own personal desires and consider universal principles of harmony and order. This type of reflection, Kant argued, prepares the mind for moral reasoning. Just as we appreciate beauty for its own sake, without seeking personal gain, we can act according to moral duty for its own sake, without regard for self-interest. For Kant, the disinterested pleasure we experience in beauty mirrors the disinterestedness of moral action. In both cases, we are guided by principles that are not motivated by personal gain or desire, but by a sense of universal value. This connection between aesthetics and morality highlights the educative role of aesthetic experiences. They help cultivate the faculties we need to make moral decisions and to appreciate the dignity and worth of others. Kant also argued that the sublime, the overwhelming and awe-inspiring experience we have when confronted with the vastness of nature or the power of the universe, has a particularly powerful effect on moral reflection. The experience of the sublime reminds us of the limits of human understanding and the magnitude of forces beyond our control. At the same time, it inspires a sense of freedom and autonomy as we realize that, despite our physical limitations, we possess the capacity for reason and moral self-determination. Kant's influence on modern aesthetics and environmental ethics. Kant's ideas about beauty, art, and nature have had a lasting impact on both aesthetic theory and environmental ethics. His emphasis on the moral significance of aesthetic experiences has influenced modern discussions about the role of art in society and the value of preserving natural beauty. In the context of environmental ethics, Kant's belief in the moral importance of appreciating nature has inspired contemporary thinkers to argue that we have a duty to protect the natural world, not only for its practical benefits but also for its aesthetic value. In modern aesthetics, Kant's ideas about the disinterested pleasure of beauty and the role of imagination in artistic creation continue to shape discussions about the nature of art and the value of aesthetic experience. Philosophers such as Arthur Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Hans-Georg Gadamer have built on Kant's insights to explore how art and beauty engage the human mind and inspire reflection on the nature of existence. Kant's distinction between the beautiful and the sublime has also influenced the Romantic movement, particularly in its celebration of nature's power and mystery. Romantic poets like William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge were deeply influenced by Kant's exploration of the sublime, using their poetry to evoke feelings of awe and wonder in response to nature's grandeur. This romantic vision of nature as a source of spiritual and emotional inspiration continues to resonate in contemporary environmental movements that seek to reconnect people with the natural world. In conclusion, Kant's ideas about aesthetic judgment and the moral significance of art and nature continue to influence modern thought. His exploration of purposiveness without purpose, the distinction between natural and artistic beauty, and the connection between aesthetic and moral reflection challenges us to think deeply about the role of beauty in our lives and the ways in which aesthetic experiences shape our understanding of the world. Kant's aesthetic theory remains a powerful tool for understanding the value of art, the moral significance of beauty, and our relationship with nature. Immanuel Kant's philosophical ideas have left an indelible mark on Western thought, profoundly influencing the way we understand morality, knowledge, aesthetics, and the nature of human freedom. His work, spanning the realms of ethics, epistemology, politics, and aesthetics, represents one of the most comprehensive and ambitious attempts to explore the deepest questions of human existence. Kant's legacy lives on, not only in academic philosophy but also in the way modern society grapples with issues of justice, human rights, and the role of reason in the pursuit of truth. One of the key aspects of Kant's lasting influence is his commitment to the idea of moral autonomy, the belief that each individual has the capacity to act according to universal moral principles derived from reason rather than being governed by external forces or desires. This idea has shaped modern conceptions of freedom and responsibility, especially in the development of human rights and democratic governance. Kant's insistence that all people must be treated as ends in themselves, never as mere means to an end, continues to resonate in contemporary debates about justice, equality, and the dignity of the individual. Kant's categorical imperative, the principle that we should act only according to maxims that can be willed as universal laws, has become a cornerstone of modern deontological ethics. This idea, which emphasizes the importance of duty and moral consistency, challenges us to think about the implications of our actions in a universal context. It reminds us that ethical behavior is not about the pursuit of personal gain or the maximization of outcomes, but about doing what is right because it is right. In the realm of knowledge, Kant's exploration of the limits of human reason remains a crucial part of philosophical inquiry. His distinction between the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it, and the noumenal world, the world as it is in itself, has shaped modern discussions about the nature of reality, perception, and human cognition. His insight that the mind actively structures our experience of the world laid the foundation for constructivist theories in psychology and education, as well as for later developments in phenomenology and existentialism. In his aesthetic theory, Kant's distinction between the beautiful and the sublime has profoundly influenced the way we think about art, nature, and the emotional power of aesthetic experience. His idea that the appreciation of beauty engages both our imagination and understanding, and that it can inspire moral reflection, continues to shape modern discussions about the role of art in society and the importance of preserving natural beauty. Kant's work also laid the foundation for modern ideas about international law and cosmopolitanism. His vision of a world in which individuals and nations respect each other's autonomy and dignity, guided by universal principles of justice and peace, has inspired efforts to build a more just and equitable global community. Kant's hope for perpetual peace, a world free from the scourge of war, remains a guiding ideal in international relations and the pursuit of global justice. And so, dear whispered ones, as we draw to the end of our journey through the mind of Immanuel Kant, we find ourselves standing on the shoulders of a giant whose ideas continue to shape the very fabric of modern thought. Kant's legacy is one of profound depth, a legacy that challenges us to think critically about morality, freedom, and the limits of knowledge. His work invites us to reflect on the meaning of beauty, the nature of justice, and the importance of treating others with dignity and respect. Though Kant's ideas may seem lofty, they are as relevant today as they were in the 18th century. Whether we're considering the ethical implications of our actions, the value of art and nature, or the quest for truth, Kant offers us tools to navigate the complexities of life with reason and integrity. So, as you lay your head down to rest, let the wisdom of Kant guide your thoughts. Remember that we are all part of a greater moral community, bound together by the shared capacity for reason and the pursuit of justice. And as always, if you wish to explore more stories of great thinkers and their legacies, don't forget to follow Whispered Tales, where the quiet wisdom of the past will continue to whisper in the night. Good night, and may your thoughts be filled with peace.